Dems and the Rhinos are in a huge snit after losing their big bipartisan border bill yesterday. Today, they regrouped and they have a new bright idea for you. In other words, a new fraud to advance in the Senate. This time, it's a foreign aid bill, and all they want is $95 billion for Ukraine, for Israel. That makes it look better, doesn't it? Gaza, you would think no money for terrorists, but you would be wrong. And Taiwan. And guess who helped the Marxists? Well, here's the gut-sickening Senate GOP sellouts. These 17 Republicans are lower than lowlifes. Here are their faces, their names, what sad sewer creatures they really are. It's disgusting to think those 17 Republicans would stoop this low just to reach, $95 billion. They're a disgrace, and the Republican Party should be ashamed, both of their leadership and these 17. You notice McConnell was in both places at the same time, a remarkable feat for a man like Mitch McConnell. Well, also today, Peter Navarro, former special assistant to President Trump, has been ordered to prison. Navarro was convicted of defying a January 6th committee subpoena, as he claimed executive privilege. Obama Judge Ahmed Mehta refused to postpone, though, the 4-month-long prison sentence. Mehta handing down that sentence last month, and he is outrageously partisan. Judge Mehta is a disgrace, in my opinion, and like nearly all of the District of Columbia court system, massively politically corrupt. And if you will, donate whatever you can. He will appreciate it. We all will appreciate it. Thanks so much for giving. It's givesendgo.org. That's givesendgo.org/Navarro. Navarro. Navarro. Again, Peter Navarro will be greatly appreciative because he is being just cruelly treated by the D.C. gulag. The judiciary is as corrupt as anything in this country. It's a shame what has happened to the nation's capital and to our judiciary, and a bigger shame what they have done to Peter Navarro and so many others. Well, earlier today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments about Colorado and its decision to remove Trump from the ballot. It isn't going so well, though, for Trump's enemies. Listen to Justice Neil Gorsuch slap around Colorado attorney Jason Murray.
Put that aside. I'm not going to say it again. Put it aside, okay? I think Justice Alito's asking a very different question, a more pointed one, and more difficult one for you, I understand. But I think it deserves an answer. On your theory, would anything compel a lower official to obey an order from, in your view, the former president?
I'm imagining a situation where, for example, a former president was, a president was elected and they were 25 and they were ineligible to hold office, but nevertheless they were put into that office.
We're talking about Section 3. Please don't change the hypothetical, okay? Please don't change the hypothetical. I know I like doing it too, but please don't do it, okay?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is
he's disqualified from the moment he committed an insurrection, whoever it is, whichever party, that happens. Boom. It happened. What would compel, and I'm not going to say it again, so just try and answer the question. If you don't have an answer, fair enough, we'll move on.
Justice Clarence Thomas, also extraordinarily critical as he dismantled the attorney Murray. Murray couldn't give Justice Thomas a single example of a state disqualifying a national candidate in all of American history. The question actually seemed to totally confuse him, as if it had never occurred at all that this might be a relevant issue. Listen to this exchange.
Well, there were certainly national candidates who were disqualified by Congress refusing to seat them.
I understand that, but that's not this case. Did states disqualify them? That's what we're talking about here. I understand Congress would not seat them.
Other than the example I gave, no. But again, Your Honor, that's not surprising because there wouldn't have been – states certainly wouldn't have the authority to remove a sitting federal officer. So what was the purpose of Section 3?
What Thomas is saying there is that Murray's argument is completely and utterly incoherent. He dismantled it in about 15 seconds. Meanwhile, have you ever wondered what the electoral map would look like if most voters had voted in person in 2020? And if we had eliminated all of those mass mail-in voting opportunities? Well, we may find out this November, thanks to the work of the Delaware Republican chairwoman, Julianne Murray. No excuse mail-in voting is now banned in the state of Delaware. Murray is the one who spearheaded the effort and filed a lawsuit against her state's Department of Elections back in 2022. At the time, Murray was running to become the Delaware Attorney General, challenging the Democrat incumbent. The Delaware Supreme Court has sided with Murray and quickly struck down the no-excuse mail-in voting law, which had allowed voters to vote by mail for extremely vague reasons such as public service, business, illness. The court also struck down a law that allowed people to register to vote on Election Day of all things. I would hope they would strike that down. After securing these important reforms, Murray recently declared that President Trump will now win the state of Delaware.
In 2020, President Trump won the machines in Delaware. And when I met him in July, this past July, and he said to me, "How do we look?" And I said, "Primary, general," and he said, "In the primary, no problem. General election," I said, "You can win." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "You want to know why?" And I said, "You beat him in 2020 on the machine vote. You lost because of vote by mail." He said, "Okay." I said, "There is no vote by mail in 24. And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I sued when I was running for Attorney General and it's unconstitutional." He was like, "Why aren't more states doing this?"
This is precisely what the Republican Party needs all across the country, in point of fact. Active change, active reform of the laws to secure our elections. The RNC, by the way, invested $30 million in the last cycle for election integrity efforts, but more, a lot more has to be done for this year's presidential election. Since the 2020 election, just 6 states, 6 of them, all Republican, have implemented stricter guidelines for mail-in voting. Only 6. As many blue states have also loosened their mail-in voting rules. California, for example, extending a COVID-19 era law that will send every single registered voter in the state a mail-in ballot. Now, isn't that nice? Isn't that convenient? And what fraud they perpetrate. Well, 2 key states for Republicans, Florida and Georgia, passed laws that raise signature requirements for mail-in ballots. Arizona also shortened the time allowed to cure a ballot. Ballot curing is the process that allows a voter to prove their identity if their signature doesn't match up, among other things. Despite these positive changes, many states still have no excuse absentee voting. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel's resignation just yesterday, at least the news of it, leaves Republicans with a unique opportunity to elect a chair who is committed to election integrity. The founder and CEO of this network, in fact, Mike Lindell, has one person in mind for the job. And now Julianne Murray. And Julianne, first of all, welcome to the show. And secondly, congratulations on your great work in the state of Delaware. How long did it take you to make the election system there make a little more sense?
Well, wonderful. Thank you for having me here. And it's, it's a funny story, actually, or not so funny. In 2020, I actually was on the ballot with President Trump in Delaware. I was running for governor at the time in 2020. Was very much impacted by vote by mail and became a proponent of election integrity and, very big advocate of it. Fast forward in time, decide to run. I'm a trial lawyer, decide to run for Attorney General. And while I'm doing that, the General Assembly basically says that the Constitution provides for absentee voting. We are going to say that you can vote, no excuse, vote by mail. And so we filed a lawsuit. It was unbelievably quick. And so the question in terms of how long did it take was actually very quick. We filed in the end of July. We had to wait for the governor to sign the bill, and then had the trial court level probably end of August of 22. Decision came out right after the primary, because the argument is only about the general election, because the Constitution only talks about the general election. And the state immediately appealed it, and we did a Supreme Court briefing and argument within about 3 weeks. Had argument on, I'm going to say it was a Thursday, and Friday they affirmed it. It was amazing.
And that quickly, the way forward for reform in Delaware. And
Yes.
the reality is that on that basis, you decided that President Trump could win. Give us your idea about. Give us your ideas right now about. Are there any other parts of the laws in Delaware that need to be reformed, or do you think this is a sufficient advancement?
It's a great question. And there's two things. The reason that I told President Trump I told President Trump he could win when I met him in July, is he actually beat President Biden in 2020 on the machines. He lost because of vote by mail. Because the Delaware Supreme Court struck it down, it has to be amended by constitutional amendment, and it takes 2 terms to do that. It cannot be done by the 24 election. So in terms of just raw numbers, it was absolutely possible. Vote by mail is not in the mix, or it is absolutely possible to win on a straight up election for President Trump. In terms of other areas, there is a lawsuit pending right now. I'm not a party to it, about early voting, also in Delaware. Right now, it is considered constitutional, but the argument is that our laws provide and our Constitution provide for an election day, not an election few days. So we'll see what happens with that. But for right now, Delaware has a 10-day early voting period that is, statutorily there for right now.
Yeah. Julianne, I have always thought that this business about extending the days for voting, early voting, mail-in balloting, I've always thought it's sort of democracy for idiots. It's so simple just to have go vote in person and be done with it. The military is one exception where you have to have, I think, absentee ballots. But for the rest, it's a convenience that I don't think the state is responsible for. What we really need to do is be able to add up votes. I don't see why you need a fancy electronic computerized machine to do that. We've done it better when we did it manually and when we did it with paper. Why in the world do we keep putting up with the fiction that this is somehow better because we've complicated it and extended it?
Well, I think that it's a great question, and the left has done a tremendous job of packaging it as we need to make voting easy. We need to, and if we make it easier, that's going to increase voter turnout. That is, so they put a pretty bow on it to make it seem like, gee, we would want to definitely encourage, more voting. More voting is better. But the problem is that also opens up the door to fraud. And so, what's the real end game here? Obviously there are many of us that believe the end game is they've done this to insert fraud into the equation.
Let me ask you this, as we've got about a minute left here. The RNC, Ronna McDaniel, is leaving, it's clear, sometime apparently after the South Carolina primary, which will be the 24th. Have you got a candidate? Are you interested in the job?
It's interesting. That has taken on a life of its own in a humbling and honorable way. I am new to the RNC in terms of I was elected in April. I am, but and I can see that as a positive and a negative. I am not part of the establishment, part of any swamp. I am a grassroots candidate who, has worked her way, through some of these ranks. At the end of the day, it's President Trump's decision. The job of the Republican Party, of the RNC, is to get a Republican president elected, and that is going to be President Trump. So if I get that phone call and he wants me in, I am there 100% because that would be his call to make.
Julianne Murray, we thank you very much for being with us, and I wish you the very best of luck, and thanks for all you're doing for the Republican Party in particular and
Thank you
the country.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The Biden administration is siding with the Palestinians. You knew that had to come. This is unbelievable, this administration. Sometimes they surprise even me. Siding with the Palestinians in Gaza against Israel. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says our ally Israel is, quote unquote, dehumanizing them. These are the same people who carried out a barbaric massacre on October 7th. And don't forget, Gaza, the Palestinians voted for Hamas to be their governing group. We'll have that story and more and its implications next. Did you know the NSA is buying all of your personal data, by the way? Illegally. It's really illegal. Illegal is nothing new to our intelligence community. It's a bombshell story, though, and the mainstream media is ignoring it. But we don't. We have with us tonight NSA whistleblower Russ Tice, former senior intelligence analyst for the NSA. He'll weigh in on all of these issues when we continue. Please stay with us. Bombshell newly discovered documents show the NSA is compiling computer data on all of us, on Americans without a warrant. And in a letter to Senator Ron Wyden, NSA Director Paul Nakasone provided newly unclassified documents revealing that the agency buys the data of American citizens, including information about the websites that we visit, the apps we use. The letter, dated December 11th, was made public last month. Senator Wyden wrote a letter to the NSA. It said in part, quote, "The U.S. government should not be funding and legitimizing a shady industry whose flagrant violations of Americans' privacy are not just unethical, but illegal." Talking about data brokers. Well, joining me now to react to all of this is Russ Tice. He's a former intelligence officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency, senior intelligence analyst, and the National Security Agency whistleblower. For 2 decades, he's specialized in something called special access programs. And those special programs were tasked with spying on other people's conversations all around the world. In 2005, Tice was responsible for helping to expose spying by the NSA on American citizens. He exposed the Bush White House for violating the law in spying on what Tice alleged was actually millions of American citizens. At one point, Tice even claimed that the NSA was spying on Supreme Court justices, members of Congress, and military officials. And I will tell you, he can expand on that list here tonight. His former employer, the NSA, tried to discredit him, to silence him. But over the years, especially with the National Security Agency spying, revelations made by Ed Snowden, Tice's claims, proved far more than what they first seemed to some. And now here is Russ Tice. Russ, great to see you, my friend. Let's start with, let's say, the massive NSA database and the money that they want to spend. They want even more money to make all of that bigger and better. Your reaction to the paltry sums that the NSA has to draw on for those massive needs of theirs?
Well, I know those paltry billions of dollars. It's kind of tough to, scrape something together that way. But yeah, now we find out, and apparently they were trying to hide it, that they were taking buying data without warrants from all the big database companies out there to incorporate with NSA's data that they already have. What's interesting, as I noticed, is when they said, "Oh, but we're not buying location information or word for word data." No, they're not, because they already have that. They already collect that. So no, they don't need to buy that. But now what they're buying is they're buying your credit card information, they're buying your travel information, your banking information, they're buying everything you search on Amazon, or you buy on Amazon, or that you look up on Google, and they're incorporating that into they're strapping it all into their databases to make a huge profile on every single citizen of this country, everyone. So this is the ultimate Orwellian, omniscient, NSA that's involved here.
Well, that omniscient NSA, we just got word today from Robert Hur, the special counsel investigating President Biden on his classified documents, and it turns out that there won't be any charges. I know this shocks everyone. Biden will not face charges for doing far worse than anything that President Trump's been accused of in classified document the area. How in the world is it that the NSA has the discipline to kind of hold their tongue when they're watching all of this go on? They've got all of the recordings of Donald Trump. They've got all the recordings of Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and all of the oligarchs from all over the world who were pumping money into the Biden family. Why doesn't somebody just come clean, talk straight and honest, and say, hey, we're the U.S. Congress, and we would like to see those records because we think that would be very helpful to our investigations? Why can't they just fess up and do that? Everybody knows they're doing it. Why not turn over the data where it can be useful?
I believe most of them are being blackmailed, because remember, they have information on everyone, right, especially Congress, especially the judges on the Supreme Court, also on the FISA court. So they have dirt on everybody. You find out that the Project Liberty Act that they want to pass, and the one before that, the Fourth Amendment act that was been squashed. I'm not even sure that the Speaker of the House is as lily white clean as everyone thinks he is, like Snow White. Because if these things don't make it to the floor for votes, then I got to wonder what kind of dirt they have on him as well.
Well, I wonder about, frankly, I've started to worry about everyone in leadership in the entire U.S. Senate, the Congress. But I'm afraid it's not the NSA. They may be in a bidding war with the CCP, because the Chinese seem to have considerable influence, not only with the Biden administration, but with the U.S. Senate leadership. I would just love to, at some point, shouldn't they file like a 90-day report from all of the intelligence agencies and tell us what the deal is, what they're using to coerce and to blackmail and force these votes that make no sense? I mean, look at the refusing to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. How easy a vote is that? And suddenly you have the chairman of the CCP committee, for crying out loud, the House Committee on the CCP, Mike Gallagher, decides not to impeach Mayorkas. He knows full well the relationship between China, the precursor drugs that go into fentanyl, and the fentanyl that is smuggled by the cartels into the United States, and they kill more people every year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War, and there's not even a whisper of protest from anyone in this country. What is going on?
Well, as far as the intel community is concerned, as long as you're pumping them money, I don't think they care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. They're going to give you certain leverage to do what you want and make sure that that the situation is clear, and whether it involves something that's a detriment to national security or not, which is ironic considering the first two words of NSA or national security. But I think it's all about preserving the deep state, and NSA is literally the lifeblood of the deep state.
Well, they've got competition now. The CIA is wanting to play big, not just in an analog and physical world way. They decided, that the NSA's got a pretty good thing going in Maryland, out in Utah, domiciling all of that data and sifting through it at their leisure. Now the CIA, you're supposed to say CIA, I just recently learned, the CIA is just trying to spend a little more money and wants to compete with the NSA in a digital artificial intelligence world. What do you know about that?
Well, what people don't know is the cooperation that's happening between the NSA and CIA. I spent an awful lot of time at CIA and some of the things that I was involved in. A time back, CIA didn't have the technical capabilities that NSA did, so we were literally sending all kinds of people down across the river, to the boys across the river, or the company sometimes we call it, which is CIA, to work with their folks to get them spun up on the technology. But ultimately, CIA has to revert back to NSA for the advanced tech that sometimes is required.
So, as a whistleblower, for 2 decades, serving the country as an intelligence analyst, we're watching what's happening in the Middle East, whether it's the Houthis, Iran, any number of actors there. This looks like a very combustible region right now. Give us we've got about a minute left. Give us your picture, your view of what's likely to happen next over there.
Are you referring to the Middle East?
Yes.
In my opinion, Iran. Well, look what happened with Iraq. If we have boots on the ground in Iran, we're going to have a whole lot of boys and girls coming back in boxes draped with flags. I say we go after Iran's money, just like our former president shut them down, and drill our own oil and gas to make sure that we have the ability to have oil and energy independence. And then, as far as laterally, I would take out all those different surrogates. I would find out who their leaders are, and then they would be visited by some AMRAAMs and some different types of some missiles that would kind of ruin their day.
Okay. Russ Tice, as always, my friend, good to talk with you. Look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Russ Tice. Well, she's back. Hillary Clinton. She's out of hiding, attacking Tucker Carlson because he actually had the initiative and the integrity to interview Vladimir Putin. Shameful, shameful, shameful behavior for a journalist. Radio talk show host Mark Simone has a lot more to say about this when we come back. Stay with us. And please join us each and every day for my podcast. That's right, the Great America Show podcast. It's on 7 days a week. It is available at LouDobbs.com, Apple Podcasts, Heart, Spotify. Wherever you get your podcast, we'll be there for you. And we'll be right back. Stay with us. Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin. A great piece of journalism, and you have to admire anyone who is committing acts of true journalism in this day and age, and Tucker Carlson is chief among them right now, in my opinion. So I was a little surprised that Hillary Clinton got so upset. I mean, very upset. She was screaming, and she was nasty. Listen to this nasty screed and attack on Tucker Carlson.
I mean, he's like a puppy dog. He somehow has, after having been fired from so many outlets in the United States, I would not be surprised if he emerges with a contract with an outlet, because he is a useful idiot. He says things that are not true. He parrots Vladimir Putin's pack of lies about Ukraine. So I don't see why Putin wouldn't give him an interview, because through him, he can, continue to lie about what his, objectives are in Ukraine and what he expects to see happen.
Well, there she is. As usual, spewing venom and really hating on Tucker Carlson. I think he can handle it, don't you? Again, to Tucker Carlson, well done, and well done again. It's nice to see real journalism happening and happening independently, if you will. And now joining us is Mark Simone, one of America's most listened to personalities in radio. He is known as Mr. New York. And Mark, thanks for being here. We appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Start
Great
with,
to be here.
if we may. Well, it's great to see you. And I have to say, there's no question whatsoever that this is one of the most bizarre periods ever. I love the fact that the Republicans and the Democrats have gotten together with the genius in the White House, and they've decided to come after a $95 billion bill just for our friends overseas. Your reaction to all of this?
Well, I hate to say it. Yeah, obviously you can't trust the Democrats in Congress, but you can't trust the Republicans either. I mean, the border bill was a great example, a complete hoax. There was nothing in there that would do anything about the border. It was just to make it look like they were trying to do something. Really, all they want to do is just give money away to everybody except us. If you're in this city here in New York, they want to tax you, congestion price you to death. If you're somewhere else, they'll send you billions and billions. That's why I always hope we don't find life on another planet. They'll start sending them money right away. We'll start giving them foreign aid too.
Unquestionably, and they will spend all they've got to just even get at the money there to them on that distant planet that you've just discovered, Mark. I can't understand one thing, and that is why this government, these people, these Marxist Dems, are so captivated by illegal immigration. Senator Murphy, and I've got to quote this for everybody. He actually said it. The Democratic strategy says has failed the, quote, people we care about most. This is one of the leading senators in the U.S. Senate saying that they're the people they care about most. I don't know about you, but I'm a little hurt.
Well, if you're a Democrat, that's your thinking. That's your strategy. If you guys won't vote for us, we'll import people who will. So you got to assume that's the underlying master plan. Get 10, 20 million people in here that'll become Democratic voters. Look what they did to California. There was a red state that elected Ronald Reagan a couple of times. Now, because of all the immigration, illegal and otherwise, there's no chance of any Republican ever getting elected there again. And they'll try to do that with every state. That's why they want millions and millions and millions of people pouring in here on the right in Congress and other places. These business roundtable sort of interests, these lobbyist interests, they'll go along with it because it's a source of cheap labor for them.
When the Marxist Dems, we didn't call them Marxists then. They were just liberals and progressives, but now we know what they really are. They're Marxists. You remember back maybe 10 years ago, if you said the words replacement theory, their hair was on fire. There is no such thing as the replacement theory. And now there's nobody screaming, complaining about it at all, because we're watching 10 to 15 million illegal immigrants enter this country just since Joe Biden took over the White House. It's just stunning to watch it all unfold. There's no such thing as a conspiracy theory anymore, is there?
Well, it's pretty much out in the open right now, and it's obvious what's going on. And the cover-up is always worse than the crime. When you have Biden saying, "Just give me a bill, give me the authority to do something about the border." Well, he's already got it in 17 places in the Constitution. He's already got it from the Supreme Court. He's already got it from several congressional bills that have been passed. So I think people are starting to see through this. I think people are going to wake up in the next couple of months and realize they've been had for the last few years.
You know, speaking of being had, and we all have been had by this administration, but to think that this pretext, this fraud they tried to perpetrate with this bipartisan border bill, which was all about getting Ukraine $60 billion, while they spent maybe $10 billion of the 20 on the border. The reality is, and nobody wants to acknowledge it, that border is now controlled by the Mexican drug cartels. And Alejandro Mayorkas has been lying. We don't have operational control of it, but he's not just lying because we don't have any kind of control of it. He should be affirmatively acknowledging that the Mexican drug cartels are in charge, and by the way, must be sending, 10% to the big guy, you think, from the billions the cartels are raking in at the border?
Yeah, to me, Mayorkas is not the problem. He's just a stooge. If you got rid of him, they'll just send in another stooge to take over. That border bill was one of the greatest political hoaxes I've ever seen. There's absolutely nothing in there that means anything. There was another 15,000 beds in the detention center. They don't use the detention centers. More border agents. They're using them to process people in. The more agents, the more illegals they'll process in. No border agents are on the border. They're all in the processing centers, which are basically a Department of Motor Vehicles for the illegals to come in with. It's got to stop. Thank God for Governor Abbott of Texas and heroes like that who at least are exposing this.
Right. And the 27 states, the other 26 governors who are standing with them, 13 of those states have they're now sending their National Guard to the border to help out the great state of Texas. I just, as I'm watching all of this unfold, I just can't even imagine where we go from here, because we know what the Marxist Dems are, and we know that the leadership of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, he's a complete fraud. What are we to think of a party that doesn't even replace this crooked, corrupt, absolutely fraud of a minority leader in the Senate? Why they call him the turtle? I don't know where he can go this time. I don't know if he's got a shell, because he is fully exposed in this mess.
Yeah, but again, you can't trust the Republicans either in Congress. The problem is whatever garbage these Democrats are trying to pull involves passing out money to special interests and donors. So Republicans jump right in on it because they love to do that too. McConnell's got to go. Yeah. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. The problem Donald Trump really faces when he takes office, this swamp was built over 50 years. It's got infrastructure. It's deep. I don't think in 4 years you can take it apart. It'd take 50 years to dismantle this.
Well, I think this time President Trump is going to be animated, energized to run against the clock, because he's seen what happens if you even pause for a moment in trying to rid the swamp creatures of their habitat. It is great to have you with us, Mark, as always. We thank you so much. And I can't wait for the next installment tomorrow from the open sewer that is our nation's capital. Mark Simone, thanks so much.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Coming up next, which just watch. DHS Secretary Mayorkas. He gets grilled before a family victimized by illegal immigrants. Also, Biden floats amnesty on the campaign trail. Oh, he's a genius, isn't he? He sees this as a real campaign issue, and he threatens to get even softer on the border while acknowledging just 2 days after the implosion of that bipartisan border bill that he has the ability all along, and has it now, to get tough on the border, but he's going to go the other way. He's getting soft. Maria Alvarez was on her way home with her 7-year-old daughter, Amelia Tambunga, when a truck ran a red light and slammed into their vehicle. The driver of the truck had been transporting illegal immigrants. He refused to stop when police tried to pull him over for speeding. Maria and Amelia did not survive that crash. Amelia's family told reporters that she was a second-grade honor student. She liked to play chess and was raising a rabbit for a 4-H kids program. but her life ended by someone who had been trying to exploit the open border policies of the Biden administration. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas squirmed when he was reminded of that during a hearing last year. Congressman August Pfluger of Texas confronted Mayorkas with the surviving members of her family. Pfluger asked Mayorkas to meet with him personally. This is how Mayorkas reacted.
It is a failure of the policies that have allowed hundreds of thousands of families to go through this grief. They want to meet with you today, Mr. Secretary. I'll host it in my office. Will you commit to meeting with them?
Congressman, I most certainly will, as long as you do not politicize the meeting.
Mr. Secretary, the only person politicizing anything here is you. The security of this country is not a political matter.
Do not politicize illegal immigration. I guess Biden didn't get that memo. The president has made it clear that amnesty is a key part of his re-election bid, and no one says Senator Chris Murphy is more important than illegal immigrants. Biden is campaigning for more immigration now, an unprecedented immigration crisis at our border. Well, it's not our border anymore. It belongs to the Mexican drug cartels, but it is the southern border, and the crisis is enlarging. Biden's Department of Homeland Security has also threatened to reduce operations at the southern border if Republicans don't concede to a border deal. I mean, this is outright coercion. It is corruption. And the man should be impeached for even suggesting such a thing. That it is as politicized as it gets is another issue, and Mayorkas is behind it. He just doesn't care. Mayorkas is many things. He's not stupid. He is evil. Everything that is happening now directly results from the policies of the Biden regime. With us now is Laura Rees. She's director of the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. She's also a Department of Homeland Security two-time alum. And we welcome you to the Lou Dobbs Tonight Show. Thanks for being with us. Let's turn, if we may, Laura, to the big bad bipartisan border bill. Were you for it or were you against it?
We were against that because it wouldn't have secured the border, and that's really the only test that matters. Unlike the House-passed bill, H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, which passed last May and would be great at ending this border crisis and truly securing the border. The Senate negotiated bill would do the opposite. It would continue to encourage asylum fraud. It would have given work permits even faster upon release to illegal aliens, which is the number one magnet for illegal immigration, and would just encourage more future illegal immigration. It accepted and codified 4,000, 5,000, up to 8,500 illegal alien encounters per day before an emergency authority could be triggered. And those are crisis numbers that the border agents currently can't handle, because when they have to encounter that many people per day, that means more gotaways are sneaking across the border somewhere else, Arizona, California, you name it. And among them, more terror watch list hits, more drugs, fentanyl, convicted felons, etc. So it was a bad bill. It's a good thing that the Senate did not pass it. But the thing we have to worry about right now is the funding, because there still is funding in the current version of the Ukraine-Israel bill that the Senate's considering.
Yeah. And coming at us with another $95 billion bid for foreign aid, 60 billion of it at least going to Ukraine. I have to ask you this, Laura. When working on this issue, as long as you have these issues, when we look at this, we see these bad bills. I have learned to say over the years that there has never been a good bill, frankly. H.R. 2 is the closest we've seen to a good bill. That is one that will resolve a lot of issues. But nearly all of the bills that have come forward over the course of the past 20 years have been bad bills. And they've been written by even worse people. These are people with special interests. They are people who really don't care about the integrity, the sovereignty of the United States, or the security of the American people. And I'm talking about everyone from presidents right down to the Border Patrol Welcome to America Committee. This is a disgusting, rancid, corrupt mess that we have on our border, in which we've now turned over to the Mexican drug cartels. There's no other truth. The cartels run that border, and yet all of the solutions, the money that's being spent, rolling out after the defeat of the big border bill today, $95 billion more, with all sorts of bells and whistles on it. When does the grift end? When does the maturity and integrity assert itself in our government, or is there any left?
Well, you have to go back to 1996, the last time that Congress passed a very good and significant immigration bill, and everything attempted since then, you're right, has not been good legislation, with the exception of the Secure the Border Act that passed last May. That was an excellent bill. Right. In terms of the grift, yes, the members of Congress don't seem to with respect to our open border. There is a lot of money in the current version that the Senate is considering that would go to non-governmental organizations and pay off sanctuary cities that have been very involved in the infrastructure and executing this open border agenda for Joe Biden. And it's important that the senators recognize that they are not free from this border mess in the current version of the bill that they are considering. It's not just for Ukraine and Israel and Indo-Pacific. The language is vaguely written for other vulnerable populations and communities, which means Western Hemisphere, the UN, International Organization of Migration, and the infrastructure they've set up with the NGOs to bring people to the U.S. and all over the U.S.
Well, since it's just you and me and a few of our friends talking here, give us a sense, with about a minute left, give us a sense of just where we go from here. We have a corrupt government. We have a border in the hands of the Mexican drug cartels. We had a president in Donald J. Trump who was ready to go to war against the cartels, and he meant a real war, not a sham war, and to take care of it. With the Marxist-Dem Party, with their total control of the federal government, what can we expect this administration to do in its final 10 months of existence, we hope?
Well, the Biden administration will continue on the path that has been following the past 3 years, and that's to continue to let in as many people as they can, as fast as they can, using as much deceit and gaslighting as they've been doing. So the number one step that we're facing right now is for Congress to not fund the tools Biden has been using to carry that out. Step two then is, with a new president, secure the border right away, close it. And then step three is, and Americans now are talking about this for the first time, large-scale deportations for the millions of people, at the very least, that Joe Biden has brought in wrongfully, to regain control, regain sovereignty, regain our ability to pay for services for American citizens, U.S. citizens, America first.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it, Laura. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And a programming note, thank you. Programming note, please join us each and every day, 7 days a week, for my podcast, the Great America Show podcast, available at LouDobbs.com, Apple Podcast, iHeart, Spotify, wherever your podcasts are, we will be there for you. Please join us on the Great America Show. And we thank you for being with us this evening. Join us tomorrow, same time, same place. And former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Kash Patel, joins us tomorrow. And we'll be talking about the Nevada caucuses, too. And Mayor Trent Staggs, he's running the U.S. Senate. He's running hard. And he says it's time to vote Mitch McConnell out. He'll be with us tomorrow. please be with us as well. The Lindell Report coming up next, and please say hi to Mike Lindell. Thanks.
We're about to hit 200 interviews that we've done for Tucker Carlson today over on Fox Nation. That's our chance, that platform, to conduct longer interviews with people who are really interesting and that we want to talk to for more than 3 or 4 minutes, as we would on the regular nightly show here on Fox News. So these are hour-long discussions with some of the smartest people, newsmakers, authors, lawmakers, philosophers. And the appeal for our perspective is this is a subscription service, so it cannot be censored by big tech, period. So it's always going to be there. Now, you may have seen a few minutes of some of these interviews here and there on our previous shows, but tonight we're going to show you a lot more. We're going to be focusing on just 3 people. Those would include country legend John Rich, competitive swimmer Riley Gaines, who turned out to be enormously interesting and principled and tough. But first we speak to one of the clearest thinkers we know, Victor Davis Hanson, frequently on our nighttime show, one of our favorite guests, and viewers are constantly asking us to hear more from Victor Davis Hanson. So we're going to bring it to you now. In this first part, he tells us how he went from earning a PhD to becoming a dirt farmer in California's Central Valley. Really an interesting story, his story, and it begins here.
I'm in the same house that was 150 years when my parents were dying. They said, I don't know what to tell you, Victor, but would you please keep the house? And so I don't know if my children want to live there or not, but it's in great shape. I work on it all the time, and it's kind of like a museum for me, so I don't want to be the first to give it up. But I walk in rooms, and it's just kind of crazy. I hear my aunt, she was crippled. She lived in the living room for 65 years. I see where my grandfather...
She lived in the living room for 65 years?
Yes, because nobody had, you didn't put people when they had polio. She had crippled with terrible polio, and she couldn't go anywhere. And I remember talking to her, and I see my grandmother. I'd go out.
Wait, so you grew up and your aunt was living in the living room?
Yes. I mean, we had a little house next to them, and then when they passed away, I moved in there. But I visit her every day. We were free range. We were like 6, and they'd just say, go out. And we'd roam all over 130 acres, and my grandparents had a house, we had a house. Neighbors would take care of us. It was idyllic. But I thought I could recreate that artificially in the 1980s. So when I came back, I thought my kids are going to be free range. I'm going to put them in the public schools just like I did. I'm going to teach them all these skills. And then I realized people thought they were crazy because, they'd say, your children are going to those schools? And you went to Stanford? But they're very great kids. And they say to me now, thank you, because all their friends are multiracial and they got practical skills. My son was a great forklift driver, and he worked once for Orchards, I think it was Orchard Supply or Home Depot, and that truck came in, and nobody was there to unload it, so he wasn't a certified forklift driver, with a little costume on and everything, so he just jumped on and just unloaded it really quick, and they fired him.
For unloading a truck?
Yes, because he was unauthorized and he didn't have the authorized skill from that particular store, and he was a masterful truck driver. He'd been doing it since he was 8. So he came back to me and he said, they got angry at me, and I said, congratulations, I'm really proud of you. I mean, that's really good. So those skills, I was very proud that they had those, and we're very close. I'm very close to my 2 children, yeah. I had a daughter that passed away, and she was the same way. She was just so practical, and she grew up picking tomatoes and everything. So we tried to recreate that artificially, but I'm not sure it was the same, because it was so fun for us. It was hard work, but this was in a bubble.
The life you described trying to create does seem like an ideal. I mean, that sounds wonderful.
It does. And I worry now when I'm 60, I said, did I put my kids through, kind of an ordeal to prove a point that they could still be agrarians and have a family farm? And then we grew up really poorer than I did, because farming was worth. And at some point, I just said to myself, they have no health insurance. I like to straighten their teeth maybe. I've got to go back and join the system. So I cleaned up my act and became...
You raised your kids poorer than you were.
Yeah. So we were called regressives, that we were leaving the middle class and becoming peasants. And then I became a Greek professor.
What were your politics like at this time?
My parents were, my mother had gone to Stanford. She was I guess you'd call him Pat Brown. Do you remember Pat Brown?
Very well. Jerry Brown's father.
Yeah, can-do Democrats after the war. Every little town, there was the wealthy guy was the undertaker, the big car dealer. It was this 90% tax rate, and there was no mobility, and they were all Republicans, and everybody else was Democrats. And then, so my parents, it seems crazy, but they were very socially and culturally conservative. No drinking, stay to, if you go to a party, you have to shake their hands, you have to look them in the eye, Victor. My mom would pick us up from, did you say thank you to the host? I said, I did. No, you didn't. Get back there. But they were also, in those days, you could be Democratic. Democratic Party was different. But my siblings are all very much more liberal than I am. So,
Still?
Yes, I'm the black sheep of the family.
Interesting. So when you graduate Stanford with this doctorate in classics and decide to go back to pruning fruit trees, did you have a political ideology at this point?
I was conservative from a young age. I told my mom I could not vote for Jimmy Carter when I was, and I liked him, but I just couldn't vote for him. And she got kind of upset about that because it's Democrat. He was a Southern Democrat in those days, not quite like she thought like this. But biggest problem I had was economic. I wrote a book about it, Fields Without Dreams. I thought that it was wrong that you gave your product and you worked so hard, and yet you had to be vertically integrated, and that required connections with government and capital.
Totally.
And I started to have a populist streak. I always had, but that made it much so. When the Trump MAGA thing came along, I was receptive to that. The idea that we're going to go back and look at these hardworking people that we've written off as losers, deplorables, Trump's people that Biden called chumps or dregs. And I really identified with them because I'd grown up with them. And so for me, it wasn't so much Donald Trump the person, but it was what he represented. And I couldn't figure out why all these Republican candidates in 2016 didn't say, why are we giving China all of these trade advantages? Why are we opening our border? These wars that I supported, the Iraq War, and but they were not in a cost to benefit or moral sense working out for the people that were fighting them. And so I couldn't understand the Never Trump movement because I thought everybody wanted to help the middle class and conservatives, but I realized that the Republican Party was one of what I had grown up with. My father had said to me, I like Republicans, you just remember, Victor, they have a certain class and they have a certain view of you. And I had kind of returned to that, even though I don't vote Democratic, but I'm not comfortable with very wealthy country club Republicans. And that's a stereotype, it's unfair, I realize that. But
I don't think it's unfair at all.
You don't? Yeah, well,
no, I grew up in that world, so I can tell you it's not unfair at all. I used to think it was unfair, defensively, but now I realize, no, it's complete. Oh, yeah, it's absolutely true. Well, stereotypes are rooted in some truth, or they wouldn't have evolved, of course. But did that affect? But by the time Trump came around, you were an established, famous. I mean, I read you for a long time in National Review.
Yeah, I don't know if I was famous, but
well, you're famous among I don't know, conservative intellectuals, for sure.
Yeah,
and you wrote one of my favorite pieces I've ever read on the changes to the Central Valley. So people knew who you were, who were paying attention. Did it affect your friendships? Did you lose friends over? Because you were an early adapter or adopter, or whatever the phrase is.
Yeah, I didn't know much about Donald Trump. I wasn't a supporter of his in the primaries, but I knew he was going to win. I just knew it. Because he was saying things that I could not believe. And, we're going to redo Youngstown, Ohio. And then he came to California. I talked to a bunch of farmers, and I said, well, did he come here? And did he have the straw in the mouth and the caterpillar cap? And did he, hey, no. He had this black suit. It was 105 degrees, and he had a Queen's act. So I said, in other words, he wasn't Hillary Clinton, or Joe Biden.
Yeah. Put
you all in chains, he didn't change his act. I said he's authentic. And he's representing the middle class, so I thought he had a very good chance. But as far as your other question, yeah, I lost all of those friends.
Really?
I left National Review this year after 20 years, and I think they were happy to see me leave too. And
why did you leave National Review?
Because there were certain issues that would pop up occasionally, and I could predict what the answer was going to be. The Covington kids, I just sensed that before we knew anything, people would come and condemn them, or the Access Hollywood.
People at National Review condemned
because I think there were certain people in the Republican movement or establishment who felt it's their duty to internally police their own, and that's kind of a virtue signal to the left. We are just part of your class. We share the same values as you do, and we keep our crazies, and they're not empirical. You saw it on January 6th. I mean, we all condemned that buffoonish riot, but within 2 weeks, I said to myself, Ashley Babbitt was shot unarmed, and we don't know anything about the policeman. We don't know anything about the report. When a policeman shoots somebody who's unarmed, there's pictures everywhere.
It was no warning, by the way.
And then I thought, they're having Officer Sicknick lie in state, but I want to know where the evidence is that he was killed. He wasn't killed. He died of a stroke or some type of...
So National Review wasn't on that, huh?
No. No. And then there wasn't armed insurrection. There were no weapons found on the people who were arrested. They're not even being charged and tried with dispatch. They're sitting in purgatory. And so these issues I would get angry about, and I try to convey that anger, but I think they felt that many, I can't say they all, but I think a lot of them felt it was their duty as Republican establishmentarians to tell the world they didn't approve of Donald Trump's tweets or his crudity. And that was my message was always, but it's good for the middle class.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like a Shane or Magnificent Seven or High Noon. He's a gunslinger we hired, and we're the townspeople that are impotent, and he came in with certain skills, and he started to have success, and now we have the luxury of saying we don't like the fact that he has a 6-gun. Right. And then but he's not, you know.
But when we look back, when the smoke clears from what we're living through right now, Victor Davis Hanson will be one of those people historians look to understand what really happened, because he takes the long view. He's a wise man. In his book, The Dying Citizen, Hanson writes that American citizenship, as we know it, is vanishing. And that's partly because politicians have used the immigration system to dilute the meaning of citizenship in order to keep themselves in power. In the second part of our interview, Hanson tells us how elites shield themselves from the effects of their policies, particularly the open border policies, and what that means for the rest of us.
I'm confident if we would just have legal, measured, meritocratic, and diverse immigration, it would work, as it always has with the Italians and people.
When you say diverse, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have 20,000, 34,000 from Mexico. We have some from Kenya. We have some from Finland. We have them, you know, so that we don't get a tribal block where people do not see others that are unlike themselves.
So that is one of the big differences in our immigration scheme presently. It's overwhelmingly from one region, one language, one ethnicity, whereas before, you know, it was from Greece and France and Germany and Mexico.
Ted Kennedy in the 1960s, he changed the immigration law and led family reunification rather than meritocratic criteria. But that was a euphemism for change the demography to benefit the Democratic Party as the party of, you know, the patron. And these were going to be the peasants, and they were going to be indentured, and they were going to show their fealty for expanded welfare. That's simplistic, but it's basically what happened. I'm confident it's going to change, though. We were starting to see that, weren't we, in 2018 and 19, a gradual reduction in illegal immigration, and then the powers of assimilation, I think, would have kicked in. We're starting to see more people from Asia, but I'm very pessimistic. 2 million scheduled in this fiscal year to come across the border. It's going to be a disaster.
How will that play out over time, do you think?
Well, it sure won't affect the people who engineered it. They will be in the bicoastal elite enclaves, and their knowledge of people who speak Spanish will be Maria, you know, the housekeeper, and Juan, the gardener, and they'll feel so good about themselves, but they will never put their kids in an integrated school or entertain or socialize with people from Mexico. I can see it in Palo Alto, where I work at Stanford. But in the long run, it's going to impact the Mexican-American lower and middle classes, because when you have these people from Central America, they go in, the first thing they do in the class, they'll say, you're a gringo, you don't speak Spanish, to a third-generation Mexican-American kid. Or they'll have crime, or you will not have advanced placement courses because you'll have to return to the bilingual paradigm. And the people who pay that price are these local communities in California and the American Southwest that are mostly Mexican-American. They're progressing just, if I could be reductionist, along the trajectory of Italian Americans. That, you know, if I say today Cuomo or Giuliani, you can't tell by the Italian name what their affiliation is, because they've assimilated. They were Catholic, Southern European, they came from Sicily and Southern Italy. It took longer. But basically, until this wave where we gave up on assimilation and controlled borders, they were starting to mimic the patterns of Italian Americans.
And you think that's changing?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a wide open border today. It reverberates through our whole society. So we're telling people, you must be vaccinated. I don't want to get into the science of that, but citizens are supposed to be vaccinated, but not 2 million people coming across the border unvetted, or 100,000 refugees are not going to be asked to be vaccinated, but the soldiers who escort them at risk to their lives have to be vaccinated. The vaccination is not the point. It's why do we make it harder on a citizen than a non-citizen? That's what I'm just...
And what is I've noticed the same, and I see it on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah.
But it's always the same theme. We make it harder on the citizen than on the person.
I think it's partly a generic idea that the underdog, the left, always wants to romanticize somebody who's poor and coming here, and we're going to have different rules, sort of like affirmative action for immigrants. But there is a racial component to it. I think the left, in this Kendi wokeness, anti-racist, you have to be racist if you're going to be an anti-racist. If we had European poor coming from Eastern Europe in droves, I think they would have no tolerance for them at all. So I do think there's an ethnic element. There's so many catalysts for illegal migration. Mexico wants the $60 billion that it shares with Central American remittances. They want a safety valve, you know, march across the border, not on Mexico City when we're corrupt and we're racist, and they are racist compared to the way they treat their indigenous people. Then we have the La Raza.
Aggressively racist.
Absolutely. And then we have the La Raza movement that wants the changing demography. We had the Democratic Party, flipped California, Nevada, Colorado, I think Texas and Arizona. They've done Mexico. So they're a factor. And then we had the corporate world where, you know, it really drove down wages. You hire somebody. And everybody said, well, yeah, but it's not that different when you pay somebody $6 or $8 in cash versus 10 or 12. But it was different because the hardest workers in the world are people from Oaxaca. They were desperately poor, and I've never seen people work that hard, at least the first generation.
Very hard.
Very hard. Wonderful people, hardworking, and exploited. And that was what was ironic about the Democratic Party, that they destroyed their old union base, or the lower middle classes of all tribes and races, because they bought into this open borders idea.
You're old enough to remember very well Cesar Chavez.
Yes. I grew up with him, Delano. I used to see him. He came to Selma, my hometown, all the time.
Head of the United Farm Workers Grape Pickers Union, famously boycott California grapes and he was I think it's fair to say, a savage opponent of illegal immigration.
He went down to the border and used force to stop people from coming across. And the word wetback, if you go back in the literature, and I can remember at rallies in Lincoln Park and Selma where people would say no wetbacks, because they call them wetback scabs.
Yeah.
They were very, and then the Teamsters sort of outsmarted them by pressuring both Republican and Democratic administrations to open the border to destroy the United Farm Workers. And then Chavez got into Synanon and a lot of weird things. And
he kind of went crazy at the end.
Yeah, he went crazy at the end, yeah.
But why would, this is kind of far afield, but I'm interested. Yeah. So the American labor movement led restriction to immigration for 100 years. Every restrictionist measure was a product of their lobbying, but then they decide they want to open the borders, which obviously hurts their members.
They wanted to, the Teamsters Union, they wanted to get all of the union into the Teamsters and certified established unions, and there was an ethnic chauvinism that this United Farm Workers was more than a labor union. It was a social, cultural, political movement. And the corporate world looked at that and thought, these guys are, you know, I guess they thought they were communists or socialists. So we're going to deal with the devil we know, the Teamsters. So they backed the Teamsters to break the United Farm Workers. But it wasn't hard to do when the Robert F. Kennedy Health Fund was corrupt and the Chavez's family had a whole octopus and tentacles all over the union. And so they kind of self-imploded. And but the corporate world would rather deal with the Teamsters any day than UFW. And then the whole union thing blew up, and now most of the labor is not unionized.
Riley Gaines certainly never expected to become a political figure. She dedicated her whole life to competitive swimming. And then the NCAA and the University of Pennsylvania allowed a man called Leah Thomas to compete against her and to walk through the locker room as she and her teammates were changing. So that changed her life completely. For an episode of Tucker Carlson Today, we spoke to Riley Gaines about what that was like. Listen next as she tells us about the moment she learned about Leah Thomas. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Fox News Live on this Monday night. I'm Jackie Ibanez in New York. With midterm elections a mere 9 weeks away, President Biden hit the road this Labor Day, hoping to sway some undecided voters. Mr. Biden traveled to the battleground states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Speaking with labor union members, he addressed what he calls the dignity of American workers. The unofficial start of fall, Labor Day traditionally kicks off political crunch time, with campaigns scrambling to excite voters ahead of November 8th. And political news causing quite a ripple across the pond today. British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is England's new prime minister, the nation's third woman to hold that title. Truss replaces Boris Johnson, who was forced to step down amid a series of scandals. The formal handover will happen tomorrow after Truss and Johnson meet with Queen Elizabeth. I'm Jackie Ibanez. Now back to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Enjoy.
Riley Gaines spent her life becoming one of the top collegiate swimmers in the United States. She set the 200-meter NCAA championships record. But at the NCAA championships this year, Gaines was forced to compete against a man, a University of Pennsylvania swimmer calling himself Leah Thomas. For Tucker Carlson Today, we spoke to Riley Gaines about how hard she trained for that championship and about how she first learned that a man planned to compete against her. Here's what she told us. What's of the 9 months you're in schools in session, like how many of those are you training?
All. So we're there over summer, we're there over Christmas, we're there over Thanksgiving, we're there over spring break, fall break. We don't get to go home, ever.
For real?
Yeah. We get Christmas Eve off and Christmas Day to come home, but we have a lot of international students who obviously you can't make it home in that amount of time, and so they're forced to kind of stay there. We're there over all breaks, summer. You never leave. You get a week off in August, and then you're right back to it.
So that's kind of what I was hoping to tease out of you, though I didn't realize it was that profound. So this is a commitment of like people can't even.
No. So all summer you have to stay there. You have to take classes because to swim you have to take classes, and to take classes you're there to swim. So it's kind of like this cycle where you're school and swim all the time. So like you said, I know you're being funny, but there's really not time for anything. There's hardly time, you know, to form relationships outside of swimming. It's hardly time to see your family and things like that. So it's
Why did you do that?
I know. It's crazy. It really is. And honestly, it is a bit like you look back, and especially now that I'm done, I'm like, how did I commit that much time and that much effort to something? But it's kind of the price you pay when you're that invested towards your goals and towards getting better at something that you just kind of oddly love.
How tight was the team?
Yeah, really close. We have about 40 girls in our team. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. But like I said, when we spend all that time together, you have classes with your teammates, we're at the pool essentially all hours of the day. It ends up being like your family, which I think kind of replaces the feeling of not being able to see your real family all the time. You do have people that are like your family, which helps.
Were you as close to your teammates? Did you love your teammates?
Yeah, I did. I lived with 3 other girls. We were like this. And so having that was nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So all of you, I assume everyone on the Kentucky team kind of came up as you did, like they've been doing this since they were little.
Yeah.
Moving toward a goal.
Yeah.
Making these massive commitments.
Yep.
All of a sudden, into this pretty predictable world, this pyramid of swimming, right? Moving toward the top, is thrown this like completely, this like curveball of like of a guy who's competing, right? So when did you first hear about this?
So I first heard about Thomas in about November of last year, which is about the middle of our season. And so how swimming works is you kind of have dual meets in the beginning of the season, and then middle of the season, which like I said is November, December-ish. All teams will go to one like bigger meet, and this is typically where like the fastest times thus far in the nation are posted. And so
you guys must all know each other at some.
Exactly. And so typically you, kind of like any sport I imagine works, your better swimmers know of your better swimmers, regardless of what school or what conference you're at. You know, that's just how it works. You know each other. You compete internationally together. You've even if you're not on the same collegiate team, you've probably been on teams together before, if that makes sense. And so you do all know each other. And so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this article posted that says, you know, Leah Thomas, swimmer of UPenn, post 1:41 200 freestyle, which is a very, very fast time. And so this was right after I...
Like, if you're a swimmer, you would be impressed by that time.
Yeah, that's really fast. And so I, being someone who was contending for a national spot, I see this in that same event. I see this and I'm like, holy moly, that's really fast. Like, who is this person? I've never heard of them. And so I click on the article, and it says it's a senior swimmer. She's from UPenn, which isn't historically a swimming school. And so I was completely thrown for a loop. And so I'm talking with my coach. I'm like, who is this person? Because I've never heard of them. And this is a really fast time, and they're a senior. So they must have just come out of nowhere to post the fastest time by great margins in the event that I was hoping to win a national title in. And so that was kind of the end of that. I get back to training and stuff, and a couple days later, another article is posted.
Did anyone know this Leah Thomas? Did you know anyone?
I didn't know. It was very much like, at least for a couple days, it was very much like, who is this person? And then another article is posted that very briefly disclosed Leah Thomas was formerly Will Thomas and swam on the men's side for 3 years, and then back to the other information of the article. And so I'm sitting there, and honestly, I was like relieved, because I was like, oh, awesome. Like, this isn't a threat to me anymore, because they won't be able to swim at NCAAs. Like, great. Like, I'm back in like my top contending spot. Perfect.
How much? And you were one of the fastest swimmers in the country.
In the 200 freestyle, I was.
In your event.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think at the time I was about 3rd or 4th ranked in the nation. And so...
and so how fast was his time, Will/Leah Thomas's time, compared to your fastest time?
At least a second and a half faster.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was a time, I think they swam at a dual meet, which is, if you know swimming, really rare. And so it was kind of just like, who's this person? I was just like kind of, but when I found out that Leah was formerly Will, I was honestly thrilled. I was like, okay, great. The NCAA would never let this happen, to where we have someone who swam 3 years as a male swim with the females at our national championships. And so I kind of just went about my training, because I was like, this is a good thing, maybe. But turns out 2 weeks before our national championships, the NCAA announced Leah will be competing with the females. And I was just like mind blown.
You can find Tucker Carlson Day episodes on Fox Nation. You can see what Riley Gaines told us about the night that Leah Thomas showed up in the locker room and what happened next. In a moment, bringing you one of our best interviews ever, country music star John Rich. Straight ahead. Despite his name, John Rich didn't grow up rich. In fact, he grew up in a trailer park in Amarillo, Texas, and went on to become a country music legend. We sat down with him for Tucker Carlson Today, and he told us just how he achieved success, and much more important than success, happiness. It turned out to be a remarkable interview. Here's part of it. If you're 18 or 19 and you're trying to be a country music star and you're on the road in a station wagon with your friends? Like, what's the work schedule like?
Well, it didn't make my parents real happy, I can tell you that. I remember my mother saying, "You'll never amount to a hill of beans if you don't go to college." And my very cocky and disrespectful answer came back, "Well, a hill of beans is not what I intend on amounting to." Bye. And I took off, van, pulling a trailer, playing Holiday Inns all over North America, from Vancouver down to Orlando. I mean, everywhere in between. But that's where I got sharp, and that's where I learned how to perform. And I was around guys that were better than I was, which is something I continue to do, is surround myself with people way better than me. They got a bar higher, so I know I'm still pushing, trying to get up there. And I got sharp around those guys, and got good at what I do, and have stayed on.
So, like, how many gigs a year would you play?
Back then?
Yeah.
Couple hundred.
What's that like?
Brutal. I'm glad I did that. I would not do that now. But at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, that's when you're suited to take on work like that. And listen, there's so many great writers and singers and performers across this country that you're up against. Your competition is ridiculous. There is no end to how great somebody can write a song or play a guitar or sing or entertain. There's really no limit to it, which is what excites me about it, that there's never any ceiling I'm going to hit. I can always get better than I am. And so because of that, you realize if you want it, man, go get it. It's like the show you talked about, The Pursuit. We're not guaranteed the right to be happy, Tucker. We're guaranteed the right to pursue happiness. And you're not always happy when you're pursuing it, but you ought to be happy that you got a right to at least go for it. We should take advantage of that in this country, that we have the right to pursue happiness and absolutely exhaust our potential every chance we get.
How hard is it to get along with the other guys in the band?
It's real hard.
Yeah, right. We always read about that.
Oh, everybody's got different lives. Some guys are married with kids. Some guys are in their early 20s with no strings attached, So a lot of moving and shaking goes on in that. But you learn there as well that you're a team, and you got to give sometimes. They got to give sometimes. It can get hot out on the road. You lock a bunch of guys up for that many days in a row.
Oh, it sounds awful. How'd you get a record deal?
It's fun, too. After playing that long, word started getting out. These boys from Texas are pretty good. And a record label guy heard about us and came out and saw us at this little tiny lounge. I mean, tiny. And we got in there and played a 60-minute set. It was in Nashville at the Opryland Hotel.
Wow.
In a little tiny lounge called the Backstage Lounge. And we played a set, and the guy walks up, he goes, "You guys should be making records." We went, "Yeah, we think so too." That moved into our first record deal.
How'd the record do?
So I think that one sold 2 or 3 million copies.
Damn.
Yeah.
So once you sell 2 or 3, I mean, you're kind of, at that point, you
get a tour bus.
Yeah.
You're like, yes, I can lay down on the road, because you're in a van, man. You're like, I'm calling the floorboard. I just want to be able to lay down. You're in between seats, and you have to struggle and suffer to go get these big things. You just do. I think people these days think that if they don't get what they want when they want and exactly how they want it, they're going to throw a brick through my window. Yeah, and they're never going to accomplish anything that's truly great because they don't understand what it takes to go get it. They're not willing to bleed for it.
So as soon as you get the record deal, then you become, by definition, you're established. You're making money.
Right.
People are investing in you.
Right.
And then out of the woodwork come all the people who attach themselves to you to make money for themselves.
Correct.
What was that like?
Well, I think early on they're somewhat necessary because you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Well, of course they are.
I mean, you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean, my first check came in on a song, my first #1, and my dad calls me, and because my mail was still going to his house. He goes, "I just got a check in the mail from BMI." I go, "Really?" Open it up. He opens it up and he goes, "This can't be right." I said, "What does it say?" And he tells me the number, and I went, "Good God." He goes, "Do you think that's a real?" I said, "Well, the song went #1. I don't know what you get paid. I must be right." And so he goes, "Well, you take 33% of that and put it in a savings account because you're going to have to pay taxes on this, and 10% of it is tithe, and don't forget that part." And he starts laying it out, and I went, "Yes, sir." Yes, sir. And then that's when you start getting business managers and attorneys and managers and all those things because you really don't know anything about it. You spent your whole life just getting good at what you're getting good at.
Yeah, and you lived in a trailer as a kid in the panhandle of Texas, so all of a sudden you make money. Like, what do you do with it?
I don't even know what this means.
What did you do with it?
I bought my grandparents a house.
Really?
Yes, sir. First thing I did, my granny rich and my papa rich, World War II vet. And here's a woman that was born in the Dust Bowl days, in the middle of West Texas
Yeah,
in the Great Depression.
Real tough.
Simultaneously, these things are going on. And they were Social Security. She's still working 40, 50 hours a week at a dollar store. He's trying to flip used cars. I get my hands on this money, and I thought, you know what? The only reason I get to go chase down dreams like this is because of old men like that went out and fought and bled and died for our right to go do it. And I don't like them being on Social Security and flipping used cars and stocking shelves at a Fred's dollar store. So I'm going to buy them a house. So I bought a house out in the country, big house, and I remodeled the basement, and that's where I live for the next 4 years.
No way, with your grandparents?
That's right. Best time of my life.
They must have been thrilled.
There's nothing better than walking up the stairs and your grandpa's been up for 3 hours, smoking his 5th cigarette and looking, and he goes, sit down, I need to tell you a story. And it's something about World War II or some horrific thing you can't imagine, you know, and man, just what I got from that, being around that generation, the greatest generation. You look at what's going on in our country right now, and it looks like they want to put us on our knees. And the only way a human being ever has to reach up is you have to put them down first. If I walk up to Tucker Carlson on my own 2 feet, I shake your hand like this, right? What does it take for me to have to shake your hand like that? I have to go down.
Yes.
You have to put me down for me to reach up. And that's what I see going on in our country, and I will not abide by that. I will not set that example for my kids. I want regular, everyday Americans out there watching guys like me with both fists up and still got a grin on my face go, I'm going to do that too. In whatever area I live in and whatever my life is, I'm also not going to bend the knee. Good. Everybody should say that. That's how you save your country.
I completely, and your own dignity, by the way, and your self-respect. You're able to live with yourself.
Yeah.
If you stay a man in the face of all this. So if we had, everybody you know in Nashville, all the creators, the artists that you know in Nashville, at a dinner right now that was not being recorded, everyone could be honest, what percentage would agree with what you just said?
You're just talking about the artists?
The artists.
I'd say you'd be way north of 50%, 60%.
Still, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you've got artists that are absolute, they're full-blown, dedicated liberals. That's what they are. Good for them. It's America. Go be that.
Yes. The
problem is they're allowed to be a wide-open liberal and still succeed in the industry. But if you're an outspoken conservative, that is no longer allowed. You see it in businesses and corporations all the time.
Of course you do.
That's how it is. But art and music cannot be contained. It is an X factor.
Period.
It is invisible. It is mist. It is smoke through the keyhole. You cannot keep it down. And so all it takes is that the creators of that music have to have enough resolution that they're going to make sure it at least gets heard one time. And you can't stop music. That's what's so exciting about it.
What's interesting in listening to you talk, since I happen to know your story and I know that you're genuinely talented at business, so you're an actual creator. I mean, you're an actual songwriter. You're not just taking other people's stuff and singing it. But you're also good at commerce and business. Like, how did you do that? That's an unusual combination.
Yeah, it is an unusual combination.
Yeah, you don't meet many people who can do that.
I've signed a lot of bad contracts. I've gotten into business with people that should, I've learned it the hard way.
Have you met some sleazy people along the way?
No, never. In the music business? Come on. What are you talking about? Here we go, conspiracy talk again. I've always been the kind of guy that I always ask God, fairly regular basis, hey, can you help me see around this corner? Because I can see straight ahead and I can see behind me, but I can't see around the corner. Can you give me an idea of what's over there? Just whenever. And throughout my life, he has given me little bop, move me around a little bit, and I get to peek around the corner and I go, interesting. That's an interesting thing. It might take me 10 years to see that come to fruition, but that's what's around the corner probably. Thank you for the note. And so then I'll move in that direction and take a long time doing it and still doing what I love to do.
So you trust what you hear?
Well, if you can't trust him, you can't trust anybody. He's the only one you can totally trust. I call it short ball, long ball. You got to play them both at the same time. Short ball might be that I'm out on the road doing 100 concerts, but I don't want to do that forever. Long ball is this other thing that's way down the road that takes a long time to see if that's even possible. But that keeps guys like me sane because I don't see an end to where I could possibly go. I see no ceiling above my head because I can see around the corner a little bit and know that that's possible if we do this the right way.
The thing to keep in mind in a period of intense change is that things are in fact changing. Things weren't always this way. So memory, history is your best defense against manipulation. When you remember the way things were, you can fight to preserve them. When you no longer remember it was always this way, then you're at their mercy. So with that in mind, it's worth remembering that 100 years ago, Memphis was one of the richest, best organized cities in the country. It had a booming economy. It had beautiful municipal parks, a lot of them, more than 100. It had one of the most modern sanitation systems in the world, something we take for granted now. But when yellow fever was real, no one took it for granted. Memphis was such a big deal that it in fact was the informal capital of an entire American region, the Mississippi Delta. But not anymore. In fact, by last year, if you went to Memphis, it was hard to believe that any of that had ever been true at any point, because by that point and now, Memphis had become a husk, and a highly threatening one. In 2021, according to federal statistics, Memphis, Tennessee was the most dangerous city in the United States. Last year, it recorded a total of 342 murders. Now, how many is that? Well, by comparison, San Antonio, Texas, which has more than twice the population, recorded fewer than half as many murders. So by any measure at all, Memphis was absolutely falling apart. But Liza Fletcher decided to make a life there anyway. After graduating from college, Fletcher moved back to Memphis. Both sides of her family had lived there for more than 100 years. She married a man she'd met in church. He grew up there too, and they had 2 little boys. She began teaching pre-kindergarten at a local girls' school. Here's a video that she made for her students at the beginning of the COVID lockdowns. It's only 15 seconds long, but you can tell immediately what sort of person Liza Fletcher was. Hey girls, it's Mrs. Fletcher. I miss you so much. So every year on their wedding anniversary, Liza Fletcher's husband wrote her a love note on Instagram. Reading them now will make you cry. But you can see why he felt that way. Her warmth and her decency shine through. Meanwhile in Memphis, 7 miles across the city, lived a man called Cleotha Abston. Like Liza Fletcher, Abston also grew up in the city of Memphis, but he could not have been a more different sort of person. Judging from his long public record, Cleotha Abston devoted his life to preying on people weaker than he was. Cleotha Abston was a predator. He was an evil man. At a young age, Abston was arrested for, among many, many other things, stealing, aggravated assault, weapons charges, carjacking, and rape. In 2000, he was convicted of kidnapping a local attorney at gunpoint downtown and forcing him into the trunk of his own car. Crimes like that are now common in Memphis. Last year, the city reported more than 100 kidnappings. But like most lifelong criminals, Cleotha Abston was never fully punished for what he did. He was released years before the end of his prison sentence. Nor was he in any way reformed by his experience behind bars. Abston was well known in his apartment complex as of last week for his sexual aggression and his perversity. He terrified his neighbors. But no one from any part of the justice system seems to have intervened. Early last Friday morning, Liza Fletcher and Cleotha Abston met for the first and last time. As her husband and 2 young children slept at home, Liza Fletcher went for an early morning run through her neighborhood. Cleotha Abston followed her, stalking her every move from a black SUV. According to the indictment, as Fletcher jogged by, Abston leapt out, beat her bloody, smashed her cell phone, then dragged her into his vehicle. Within an hour, Liza Fletcher was dead. She'd been sexually assaulted and murdered. Police arrested Abston soon after based on surveillance video, but he refused to say what had happened to Liza Fletcher. So her family waited in agony, but he didn't care. He never spoke. Yesterday, authorities finally found Liza Fletcher's body. She'd been thrown like garbage behind an abandoned building in a seedy part of town. The whole story could not be more shocking or more horrible. But here's what may be the scariest part. Some people didn't seem particularly shocked or horrified by it. In the hours after Liza Fletcher's disappearance, Biden voters on social media seemed to dismiss the crime on racial grounds. Why are we paying so much attention to the kidnapping of an attractive, privileged white woman? That's racist. Others seem to blame Fletcher for the atrocity committed against her. Why was she jogging at that hour anyway? In Memphis? Come on. The point they were making was clear. Everyone knows the rules. Liza Fletcher violated those rules. You can't go outside at certain hours in certain places in America, obviously. And if you do, if you violate the rules, you run the risk of being raped and murdered. That's how things work in this country. So adapt, accept it, move on. To some extent, if we're being honest, all of us feel that way. Whether we articulate it or not, we know what the rules are. We know what we can and cannot do in modern America. Nothing is ever spelled out. Nothing can be spelled out at risk of punishment. But everyone knows what the parameters are. Cities like Memphis or Baltimore or Detroit or Montgomery or Gary, Indiana or Wilmington, Delaware or a dozen other formerly prosperous, orderly little cities across the country were destroyed forever by the rioting that accompanied our last progressive social revolution more than 50 years ago. Politicized criminals started breaking things, torching buildings, stealing, and immediately anyone with a decent job just left. They pulled their kids out of school, sold the house or not, didn't matter, and they split for somewhere else. And mostly they have never come back. That is true not simply in Memphis, but in places all over the country. So it seems a little weird to a lot of people when someone like Liza Fletcher, someone who could live anywhere, voluntarily moves back to a place like Memphis. Not to some suburb of Memphis, but to the city of Memphis. That seems weird to people. But it's not weird. It's not odd at all when you think about it. Liza Fletcher was from Memphis. She grew up there, and she had a right to come back. This was her country, too, just as it's your country, too. An American citizen should be able to live or walk anywhere in America without being raped or murdered for it. Period. That is the baseline requirement for civilization. It's called order. But increasingly, that is not what we have. What we have is a country where you just can't go some places. You're not wanted there, and it's too dangerous for you to go. Most people accept this by default, but we should never accept this under any circumstances. To accept something is to concede that it is more or less normal. Once we acknowledge something as normal, whether it's children being castrated in the name of trans rights or women being murdered by rapists who should have been in prison but weren't because equity, once we accept that as normal, we are stuck with it forever. It is the new status quo. It will never change except to get worse. The good people who lived in Memphis a century ago would never believe what has happened to the city they built. They would weep if they saw it. That will be the experience of every American before long. Our entire country will be Memphis if we don't put a stop to this insanity right now with as much force as is required. So Joe Biden gave the most threatening presidential speech in American history last week. He spoke in front of a blood-red backdrop, flanked by U.S. Marines, and he delivered, if you take a step back, the blueprint for the rest of his administration. Criminalize dissent, effectively ban the opposition, and use the federal agencies to transform America into a one-party state. It's called authoritarianism. Here's what Biden said in a speech the White House advertised as non-political. Watch this.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. The Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. They promote authoritarian leaders, and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country.
It's enough to make your head spin. Donald Trump has been banned from speaking in public. He has been censored at the behest of the Democratic Party. He can no longer go on social media, our electronic town square. He's been totally erased. And yet, Joe Biden says, Trump and his supporters promote authoritarian leaders. And he says this at exactly the moment that he is sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and its authoritarian leaders every month. Authoritarian? Oh, that just scratches the surface. Over the past year and a half, the government of Ukraine has jailed its top political rival. It has banned opposition parties, and it has outlawed independent media. Oh, but that's not authoritarian. What's authoritarian is disagreeing with Joe Biden. Do that, and Joe Biden will stand in front of the military he controls and declare that you were an enemy of the state. So watching the fanatical support of the White House for the actual authoritarians who run Ukraine, you can sort of see the template here. But of course, as is always true when Joe Biden speaks, you can't hold him entirely responsible because not only did he not write the words, he's not aware that he spoke them. Just the other day, he said, after giving the speech, when we're quoting, "I don't consider any Trump supporter a threat to the country." That was on Friday. Our media seem to ignore that. They'd be very disappointed if they heard it because they listened exactly to the words Biden spoke, and they love them. Watch.
President Biden gave a really strong speech, and I loved it. I believe everything he said.
It was an urgent wartime address.
And something else that really stuck out to me is that he almost seemed to sort of be reclaiming patriotism.
If you look up fascism in the dictionary, you're going to find all of those things. So I'm really not sure what the Republicans are all upset about other than the fact that it was named.
Obviously, Republicans, I think, are the biggest threat to democracy. We don't separate right-wing extremists and Republican Party anymore.
Hillary Clinton told the truth when she said that there were deplorable people in the Republican Party supporting Donald Trump, and he was exciting a lot of racism and misogyny and bigotry.
The Republicans who were like, oh, he's calling us fascists. If you're not a fascist, he's not talking about you. So lighten up.
Oh, so if you're innocent, you have nothing to hide. Don't worry. It's amazing how Soviet the whole thing is. Joe Biden calls for political purges and law enforcement crackdowns on his political opponents, and state media cheer him on. In a speech about the threats to our republic, Joe Biden doesn't mention anything but domestic threats. He doesn't mention China a single time. He didn't mention the border or fentanyl or crime. He only mentioned people who oppose him politically. And once again, like the obedient little servants they are, our media cheer him on. You have to wonder about their views on authoritarianism. Obviously, they're for it. In fact, one of these journalists wrote the speech. That would be John Meacham, who wrote for many years at Newsweeklies and now is America's most banal historian. Apparently, he had a hand in writing the speech last week. He also redecorated the Oval Office at Joe Biden's request. He is now our propagandist in chief. And it's not hard to see what inspired Meacham to write that speech on Thursday. Meacham admires autocrats who silence their political opponents. Earlier this year, Meacham went on television to compare the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, to Winston Churchill and the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy. We want to prepare you now for a torrent of cliches because those are the only chunks of language John Meacham is capable of using. Now that you're prepared, here it is. Quote, "It may sound sentimental, but it has the virtue of being true." Right. So at the same time, Zelensky, this Winston Churchill figure, was criminalizing dissent in his country. He shut down 3 television stations. As his spokesman put it, those media have become one of the tools of war against Ukraine. So they are blocked in order to protect national security. Oh, so those TV stations are sort of like Donald Trump or Fox News. We need to silence them in order to preserve our democracy. Democracy, it was only one side gets to speak. So it really is democracy circa 1972 Bulgaria. It's a democratic republic, meaning the people who live there have no representation whatsoever. The party decides. It's hard to believe any of this is happening, but it is. And on Thursday, Joe Biden in his speechwriter made it explicit. So where's the pushback to this? No president's ever given a speech like this. So you wonder, where are those pious defenders of our norms? Joe Biden announces that we need a one-party state, and he says it flanked by active-duty U.S. Marines, and nobody says a word? Where was Mark Milley? Isn't he a great defender of democracy? Where were the Cheneys and everyone else who's upholding our sacred system of government? Where are they? Nodding along? Too embarrassed to speak? Now is the time to speak. They're always welcome to speak on this show. Always. They're always invited here. In the meantime, we turn to Jackson Hinkle. He's the host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle on YouTube. He joins us now. Jackson, thanks so much for coming on. So there's something really... Look, I understand people are partisan on TV. There's a lot of pressure to take your side. But for Biden to get up there and say the single biggest threat to our country is anyone who opposes me in the coming midterm elections, and the media to nod along, makes you think we've crossed some kind of line.
We have crossed the line, Tucker, and it's so interesting that, anyone in the media today would be saying that they liked what Joe Biden said in that speech because it was a dictator-inspired speech. Not only that, but it seems like a lot of the practices and the actions that the Biden administration is employing in the United States right now that were reflected in that speech are very closely aligned with what the dictator Zelensky is doing in Ukraine. Joe Biden is plunging us into a fascist state, and he is taking cues from what Zelensky is doing in Ukraine to manufacture this dystopian state and this dystopian reality in America. And there's no real surprise for me there because at the end of the day, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Joe Biden are controlled by the same exact people. They're controlled by individuals like George Soros and controlled by people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, and they're going to do whatever they want. To put it quite simply, Zelensky is using the intelligence community in Ukraine and the Nazi Azov thugs in Ukraine to silence freedom-loving Ukrainians. Joe Biden in the United States, though he can't remember what he had for breakfast this morning or who his wife is, his handlers and his cronies are prepping the CIA, the FBI, Antifa, the IRS, and now Ministry of Truth to attack freedom-loving Americans.
Maybe someone should have, in the opposition party, the one he's calling effectively illegal, should have paused before funding this insanity in Ukraine, which is tanking our economy and making a mockery of democracy, before signing off on it and just putting Ukrainian flag lapel pins on and nodding dutifully to Joe Biden. Why didn't anyone do that?
You'd think that they do that, but so many of these individuals in Washington, D.C., the neoconservatives, the rhinos, and the entire Democratic Party are beholden to the military-industrial complex. And that is extremely out of line with what average Americans need right now. We don't have clean drinking water in Jackson, Mississippi, yet we're sending $7 billion over to Ukraine, a country that I'm sure most of these Congress people couldn't even point to on a map. It's insane. The White House this week, Tucker, I'm sure you saw, came out and said that anyone who doesn't hold an opinion reflected by the majority of the American public is extreme and therefore an extremist. Well, what does that make Joe Biden? Only 38% of Americans, if you believe the polls and what they tell us, if you believe they're that high, only 38% of Americans agree with Joe Biden. So by the White House's own definition, that makes him an extremist.
Yeah, and so much for minority rights also. I mean, I thought you were allowed to disagree. This really is quite a moment we're living through. Jack Sninkle, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So what we've been seeing for weeks turns out to be absolutely, conclusively, provably true. The FBI hid damaging intelligence on Hunter and Joe Biden's business dealings, including information first unveiled on this show a couple of years ago now. And we know it for certain. That's straight ahead. A few weeks before the last presidential election in 2020, a man called Tony Bobulinski held a press conference. And in that press conference, he provided evidence that Joe Biden was directly involved and benefiting from his son's overseas influencing peddling operation. We spoke to Bobulinski for an hour on this show. He demonstrated that Joe Biden stood to gain at least 10% of the proceeds from a deal with a Chinese state-owned energy company. Well, tonight, the New York Post is reporting that FBI agents spoke to Bobulinski for several hours in October after his press conference. An agent called Timothy Thibault was assigned to handle these claims. Sources tell the New York Post that Thibault, who's been accused by FBI whistleblowers of sabotaging the Hunter Biden investigation, did in fact sabotage the Hunter Biden investigation by burying Tony Bobulinski's allegations. Miranda Devine broke this story and many others at the New York Post. We're happy to have her on tonight. Miranda, thanks so much for coming on. So, explain, if you would, the story that you wrote.
Thanks, Tucker. Well, what we've found now that's new is that Tony Bobulinski was interviewed for 5.5 hours by the FBI 11 days before the 2020 election. He gave them chapter and verse on Joe Biden's involvement in his son Hunter and his brother Jim Biden's influence peddling scheme around the world. Tens of millions of dollars came into Biden family coffers, including from China. Now, Joe Biden was involved, and Tony Bobulinski told the FBI that he had met with the former vice president twice. Now, we also know that Tony Bobulinski handed over the contents of 3 of his phones, and he met with 4 FBI agents, and then he was told that Timothy Tebow, who's now been made famous by Senator Chuck Grassley as somebody who ran interference in all the Hunter Biden material that the FBI had before the election, Timothy Tebow was assigned as point man. And Tony Bobulinski, his lawyer, called Tebow and said, "What's happening next?" And Tebow assured him that he would keep him up to date with the next stage in the investigation, and that there was an investigation going on into Tony Bobulinski's amazing bombshell whistleblower allegations. And he was told that he would probably have to come back for a follow-up interview. But he never heard from them again. And it seems that Bobulinski's phones and his testimony just went into the same black hole that Hunter Biden's laptop went into when the FBI took possession of that in December 2019. And the fact is that Bobulinski has nothing to do with the laptop other than he could corroborate a lot of the material on the laptop, because he was CC'd into a lot of these emails that we reported on from the laptop. And so he's a very credible witness. There's no way you could smear him as an agent of the Kremlin. He's a former naval officer, much decorated, and he had a security clearance, top secret, for the NSA and for the Department of Energy. So this is someone who should have been a star witness before the grand jury, now being convened in Delaware to investigate various allegations about Hunter Biden. He's never been subpoenaed. He's never appeared at the grand jury. They have just forgotten about him.
How can that be? I mean, it's so obvious that they're suppressing the investigation.
Look, Tucker, I mean, it is the duty of the FBI, just on national security grounds, to have investigated what Tony Bobulinski, a very serious man, was telling them about one of the candidates for president in the 2020 election. They had a duty to investigate whether or not Joe Biden was compromised by China because of the millions of dollars his family took in.
That's right. And he is a serious man. That's right. He's not a political actor. He's a business guy and a patriot. Miranda Devine, thank you so much for your reporting tonight.
Thanks, Tucker.
So just a week ago that the state of California, Gavin Newsom, its purported governor, said that everybody's going to be required to have an electric vehicle. No more gas engines coming really soon, because California has something called renewables, and this is the future. How's that going to work? Well, just a few hours ago, California's grid operator delivered some stunning news. It issued an upgraded level 2 emergency alert. The grid operator is telling Californians to, quote, be ready for potential rotating power outages. Blackouts are expected tonight in our biggest state. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, just released a video telling residents to do their part to protect the energy grid.
These triple-digit in any really large appliances.
Oh, so you run the state into the ground, make it look like Guinea-Bissau, our richest state, is now our most dysfunctional state. You did that, Gavin Newsom. You and the one-party political machine in your state, but it's the residents' fault. Do your part. Don't use your appliances. This is insane. Well, in happy news, you could hear the glass shattering, countless glass ceilings just crumbling into dust when Karine Jean-Pierre became the president's chief publicist, and she's a deeply impressive person. And we have the tape to show just how impressive she is. We'll be right back. Now required to believe, there are so many it's hard to keep track, but one of the main ones is the Ukrainian government is running a vibrant democracy that's a model for our country. Nothing the Ukrainian government does is bad, and there are absolutely no Nazis working for the Ukrainian government. Well, the problem is that dumb people kind of believe this, and then that leads to embarrassing moments, as Jon Stewart found out the hard way recently. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us.
Hey, Tucker, turns out the journey from fascism to heroism now only takes a few months. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, several media outlets, including the U.S. government's own Voice of America, were happy to lash out at Ukraine's Azov battalion for embracing Nazism. Now the U.S. appears to be embracing the Azov battalion. at the happiest place on earth, no less. Here's the deal. During the Defense Department's annual War Games at Disney World in Orlando, liberal comedian Jon Stewart reportedly awarded Ihor Halushka, a member of the Ukraine's Azov force, the, quote, Heart of the Team Award for his inspiration, his shining example, and, of course, his humor. We're told Halushka happily accepted his award with a sleeve over his left arm, a left arm that has previously been photographed with a Nazi tattoo. We should note the Azov battalion member picked up his award with many people, including Jon Stewart, chanting, Ihor, Ihor. Meantime, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky remotely rang the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange today. It wasn't just symbolic, mind you. Zelensky was also pitching his country, looking for money. In other words, asking investors to support the nation's projects. Google and Microsoft have already invested. Tucker.
Of course they have. The great Trace Gallagher, thanks so much for that.
You bet.
Jon Stewart giving awards to Nazis at Disney World. The world has just really gone crazy. One person who's definitely not crazy, who's incredibly brilliant, really a model for the rest of us, would be Karine Jean-Pierre. She's the president's new glass-ceiling breaking publicist. And because we're easily amused, we pay very close attention to our briefings every day, and today was one of the best. In today's briefing, Karine Jean-Pierre mistook a Russian gas pipeline for her favorite department store. Watch this.
What we see Russia's doing, and we've been very clear about this, is that they're using energy, they're weaponizing energy, and it's choosing to one of the things that has been out there, to shut down the pipeline of Nord Stream 1.
Nord Stream 1, next to Dillard's 2 and Sears 3 and the whole kind of aging mall community of Eastern European natural gas pipelines. Karine Jean-Pierre. Was that better or worse than Friday's performance? On Friday, in case you were busy celebrating Labor Day, you saw her brag that Joe Biden, the greatest president of all time, has created no fewer than, get a pen, 10,000 million new jobs. Watch this.
We have created nearly 10,000 million jobs since President Biden took office, which is the fastest job growth in history. So you're asking me, where's the success? Here it is.
So you're asking, where's the success? He created 10,000 million new jobs. Now, she's not a math genius, and we're not judging or anything, but she didn't have time to do the numbers. 10,000 million is 10 billion. And we did the math, just quick back of the envelope stuff, and that would mean that Joe Biden, according to his publicist, Karine Jean-Pierre, has created 30 jobs per person in this country. That's every American. Man, woman, child, two-spirit, agender, pansexual, whatever. Every person who lives in this country got 30 new jobs per person, thanks to Joe Biden. We're going to be busy, but we're also grateful. So as we pointed out many times, and if you live in this country, you know, transgender activists are just flat out targeting kids in America, indoctrinating kids, working out some bizarre sex fantasy with kids. Let's just be completely honest about it. Stay away from our kids, okay, but they're not. And in some cases, castrating them chemically and physically. So we decided to do a documentary. So the Democratic Party only exists by leveraging race and race hate among groups of Americans, not uniting but dividing. That's the whole scheme, of course. A brand new film is exposing what's going on. We'll show you a clip from it and talk to the man behind it next. California is in many ways a wonderful place, still is, and there's still a lot, believe it or not, great people who live there. The problem with California is there's zero diversity at all in politics. One party runs it, has for decades, and they've run it completely into the ground. So Larry Elder, who has been in the media in California for decades, decided he was going to run because he could do a better job, but the media in California immediately decided, well, Larry Elder, if he's going to challenge the Democratic Party, must be a white supremacist, despite the fact he doesn't look like your classic white supremacist. But that's what they always do. The media follows the direction of the Democratic Party and divides people along racial lines for political benefit, even when, in the case of Larry Elder, it makes no sense at all. They do it anyway, and it still kind of works. So Larry Elder has had a lot of time to think about this, and he made a movie on it. It's called Uncle Tom 2, and it looks into why leftists have adopted the strategy, not of dividing us along class lines, that was the old template, but dividing us along racial lines a more destructive approach, that's for sure. Here's a clip. Yes, now, Larry, thanks so much for coming on. So, to what extent was this film informed by your experience running for governor in California?
Well, it was also informed by the experience of people like Herman Cain, who were treated as white supremacists, fight the fact that they're black. And the reason the director, Justin Malone, and I did these films, Tucker, is to refute this shorthand narrative that the black experience in America was blacks emancipated, wandered along aimlessly in the face of severe obstacles, and then along came the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. And even though blacks got voting rights and other rights, blacks are still mired and do daily battle in a country that is systemically racist. And of course, it's nonsense. After slavery, the majority of black people, of course, could not read or write. Within a relatively short period of time, they could. And in 1940, 87% of blacks lived below the federally defined level of poverty. 20 years later, that number had fallen to 47%, a 40-point drop in 20 years, the greatest 20-year period of economic expansion for blacks in American history. Why? Reliance on family. In many instances, a black kid was more likely to be born to a mother and father married to each other than a white kid. A reliance on American values. Look at speeches by Frederick Douglass, replete with references to American values. Reliance on Judeo-Christian principles and a belief in entrepreneurship. 1901, Booker T. Washington writes a book called Up From Slavery. This is a man who was born a slave, talks about working hard, learning a skill of value to the community, and if you do that, nothing at all can stop you. Fast forward, we have a movement called Black Lives Matter, where the co-founders are self-described trained Marxists. Marxist, of course, was an atheist who hated private property, did not believe in entrepreneurship, and on Black Lives Matter website, they attacked the nuclear intact family. So the very things that made blacks go forward despite horrendous obstacles, despite the Klan, despite lynchings, despite all these kinds of things, still enable black people to go forward. They're all now under attack by movements like Black Lives Matter.
When you put it that way,
I have no idea what that
it makes.
I have no idea what that was, Tucker.
I think it was true.
I think it's systemic racism. I think it's systemic racism.
You're right. Great to see you tonight. Congrats on the movie.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Charles Haywood had a long and very successful business career, and he kind of retired and started reading a lot and then writing reviews of the books for Amazon. And then he started thinking more deeply, and then he turned his hobby reviewing books into an entire political philosophy, which we found really interesting. It's called foundationalism and is focused on moving politics to a future past. It was interesting. So we spoke to Charles Haywood at great length about it for an hour because we wanted to learn more. We thought you would want to as well. Here's part of the conversation.
So foundationalism is what I like to call the politics of future past, which is the subhead of the website. And by that I mean that foundationalism isn't meant to be an ideology. That is, I'm not coming up. Well, I'm not Karl Marx, that I haven't discovered new laws of history that I'm enunciating to people. The idea of foundationalism is a set of principles that will allow a return to human flourishing, but is not nostalgic. That is, one of the things that people on the right fall into very easily is nostalgia.
Yes.
It used to be so good in 2005 or 1995 or 1925. If only we could go back to that. I mean, this is a basic principle of human life, that you can't go back. Yet for some reason, people fall into this all the time, that we need to go back and we need to just wind the clock back or partially or wholly to some earlier time. So what I think we should do is we should adopt principles that have been proven through time, wisdom of the past, implemented in a future state. The basic principle of foundationalism is that autonomic individualism or emancipation of people from unchosen bonds is bad. That is, people shouldn't be allowed to choose whatever it is that they want to in their life. There should be a very high role in society for stigma. That is, you shouldn't do that. We look down on you because you choose a career over family. That society should, in fact, coerce to some degree people to choose the right roles. And by the same token, a man who fails in his responsibilities to provide for his family, to defend his family, that person should be socially shamed. We have kind of been told our whole lives that stigma is somehow bad, that all stigma, the goal of a society should be to remove stigma.
That guy's really interesting. Much more interesting than our public intellectuals like John Meacham, who speak entirely in banalities. That guy's not banal at all. Full conversation, Tucker Carlson today, tomorrow, 7 a.m. on Fox Nation. So we just learned that one of the biggest actresses in Hollywood is having very personal thoughts about this show late at night. Does it make you uncomfortable? It made us uncomfortable, but we're duty-bound to tell you more, and we will. In television, you lose control of a lot of things, foremost the way other people perceive you. So can it really be your fault? Are you really responsible if major Hollywood starlets dream about you? Maybe it's the sexy glasses. Who knows? We can only speculate. Trace Gallagher has the details for us, though, tonight.
Yeah, and just so you get the total dichotomy of this, Tucker, it's important to note that while Jennifer Lawrence sees you in her head at night, you know, the nightmares when she sleeps, she's likely not watching you now. But her parents are probably watching you because they're fans. And as Jennifer notes in the October issue of Vogue, the 2016 election has caused tension among her Kentucky family. Quoting here, "I just worked so hard in the last 5 years to forgive my dad and my family and try to understand. It's different. The information they're getting is different. Their life is different. I'm sorry, I'm just unleashing, but I can't F with people who aren't political anymore." Now, as for her Tucker Carlson Tonight-mares, they likely stem from a 2017 segment where you joked that she had Trump derangement syndrome, and where several media outlets said that she blamed Trump for a series of 2017 hurricanes. Now, remember this, she was taken, she says, grossly out of context. Grossly? Really? I mean, shortly after she said Trump would be the end of the world and that Trump was a jar of mayonnaise, she went on to say in a 2016 interview with a British television station that the election was, quote, startling. And quoting here, "You know you're watching these hurricanes now, and it's really hard not to feel Mother Nature's rage and wrath." And it kind of makes one ask, rage or wrath at whom exactly? In 2017, it would likely have been Trump and the deplorables, but today it would be Trump and the semi-fascists where the rage and wrath is directed. It's just a guess, but it's a good one.
Amazing. So it's just, she says she has nightmares about us. That's what they're calling it now. Nightmares. Yeah. All right, we're flattered. I think it's the sexy glasses. In either case, Trace Gallagher, we appreciate your hard-hitting reporting on that subject. Thank you. Can't help it if they dream about you. We're out of time. Unfortunately, tomorrow night we will take a closer look, a very close look, at the Senate race unfolding in Pennsylvania. The Democrat in that race, John Fetterman, is clearly not well at all. We're not being mean, just sincere. We'll show you the tape. Plus, an investigation into fentanyl coming to this country through Mexico from China. Who's being arrested for it? Anyone? That's tomorrow night, 8 p.m. In the meantime, here's Sean Hannity.
Thanks, Tucker. What do you think about the Hunger Games, you and Jennifer Lawrence? I like the idea.
She's dreaming about me, man. An awful lot of forgotten little towns in this country, and Braddock, Pennsylvania is definitely one of them. It's only 11 miles outside Pittsburgh, but Braddock is basically empty at this point. Only 1,700 people live there. That's down from a population of more than 18,000 during the Second World War. Braddock is now so underpopulated that you can buy a 4-bedroom home there with a 2-car garage right in the middle of town for $3,000. Don't believe it? Check it out yourself on Realtor.com. So, you know the story. For decades, the biggest employer in Braddock was manufacturing, something called the Edgar Thomson Steelworks. In fact, Andrew Carnegie built it there, along with his first stone public library, which still stands. So for generations, Braddock, Pennsylvania was a real place. And then, inevitably, the steel plant closed. And the usual disasters arrived. Unemployment, hopelessness, drugs. People left by the thousands. But one man saw an opportunity in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Not an opportunity for the town, but an opportunity for himself. That man's name was John Fetterman. Fetterman was 35 years old and had never in his life had a real job. Fetterman was not from Braddock, hardly. He grew up in an affluent neighborhood 4 hours away. Fetterman had spent his adult life going to school, first to business school, then to Harvard for a so-called Masters of Public Policy, which for the uninitiated is an utterly meaningless document that you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get in order to tell people that you went to Harvard. But in Fetterman's case, it wasn't expensive at all. It was free. His dad paid for it and paid for everything else. As the Philadelphia Inquirer put it, for a long stretch lasting well into his 40s, deep into middle age, Fetterman's main source of income came from his parents. They gave him and his family $54,000 in 2015 alone. In other words, John Fetterman was a classic trustafarian, a flaky middle-aged man looking for a purpose in life. And in Braddock, Pennsylvania, he found one. In 2005, a year after arriving in Braddock, Fetterman announced he was running for mayor. And amazingly, boldly, given that he was a professional student living off his rich family, John Fetterman decided to run as a blue-collar populist. But the media asked no questions. They loved it. In John Fetterman, the media saw themselves. He was just like them. So Fetterman narrowly won the race, and then the campaign to boost John Fetterman's career began in earnest. The Guardian newspaper described John Fetterman as the coolest mayor in the country. The New York Times told its readers, who didn't know any better, that John Fetterman had, quote, turned the busted town of Braddock, PA, into a national symbol of hope, hard work, and authentic blue jeans. Wow, how inspiring. Fetterman thought it was. He went on a national tour to brag about how he was single-handedly saving this benighted mill town in western Pennsylvania. He gave a TED Talk, of course he did, about how he was running Braddock using the lessons that he learned at Harvard. In 2011, he went, of course he did, to the Aspen Ideas Festival to further brag. Here's what he said, quote, "We created the first art gallery in the four-town region with artist studios. We did public art installations. And I don't know if you consider it art exactly, but I consider growing organic vegetables in the shadow of a steel mill an art. And that has attracted homesteading." It's so perfect. Homesteading, organic vegetables, art installations. And also, again, inevitably, a heaping dose of climate theology, all imported from Harvard. So Fetterman imposed on a town with no jobs carbon caps on Braddock, Pennsylvania. And he claimed these carbon caps would somehow, he never explained how, bring more manufacturing jobs back. He called this initiative Carbon Caps Equals Hard Hats. So expensive, unreliable energy will mean more manufacturing jobs. And yet somehow no one laughed at him. So John Fetterman kept going. In a 2009 advertisement for himself, he promised that, quote, with a smart, economically viable carbon cap policy in place, communities like Braddock can begin to build its manufacturing and middle class back up. This whole notion that we can continue to operate as we have been and ignore climate change is ludicrous. They loved it at the Aspen Institute. And to be fair, John Fetterman did not ignore climate change. He talked about climate change endlessly. He made climate change the centerpiece of his administration in Braddock, Pennsylvania. As for actually running the town or improving the town of Braddock, he was not interested, not even a little bit interested, and that's provable. As mayor, according to public records obtained by the Washington Free Beacon, Fetterman missed more than a third of the borough's monthly meetings. He was off at the Aspen Institute. In his entire tenure as the mayor of Braddock, John Fetterman cast just a single vote at a city council meeting, and it was a meaningless one. It was a procedural vote for borough president. So what happened next? This is always our favorite part of the story. What were the results? How did Braddock, Pennsylvania fare under the leadership of John Fetterman? That's really the only question that matters. And again, we want to be as fair and objective as we can be. So we're going to tell you that under his tenure as mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, the seas did not rise. That is true. Braddock is still on dry land. Of course, it's very far from the ocean, but it's still dry. So his climate policy worked. He can be proud of that. Unfortunately, everything else fell apart in Braddock. People kept fleeing. Braddock's population is currently at its lowest level ever recorded. The median income in Braddock, Pennsylvania is $14,000 a year. More than a third of households in Braddock live below the poverty line. Braddock, by the way, has one of the highest crime rates in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2018, shortly after Fetterman left office, Braddock's per capita murder rate was higher than it is in some of the most dangerous countries in the world. Honduras and Belize are safer than Braddock, Pennsylvania. So that's a failure. And in a functioning system, a record like this would have disqualified John Fetterman from ever running for anything again. He failed demonstrably as a leader. It had a higher murder rate than Honduras and the lowest population ever recorded. Sorry, climate change didn't improve the town. So in a fair system, a system that cared about achievement, a meritocratic system, John Fetterman would be leaving politics on the express train and moving on to something like interpretive dance. Try that. Maybe get his dad to pay for ski lessons and move to Aspen or something. But we don't have a functioning meritocracy, much less a functioning political system. We have a very broken one. So John Fetterman set his sights even higher. Having wrecked Braddock, he became lieutenant governor, and now he plans to run for the United States Senate. What's he going to do if he gets there? Well, his idea is to make the entire state of Pennsylvania and the entire country much more like Braddock, with much higher crime rates. And we're not making that up. Here he is, John Fetterman, in 2020 as lieutenant governor, fantasizing about giving amnesty to thousands of violent criminals, including murderers.
If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and fix one thing, what would it be?
Life without parole in Pennsylvania. We could save billions in revenue long term. We could save thousands of lives and not make anyone less safe. And also expunge as many permanent records of people that have been living their best lives and have been paying well beyond when they should have for a charge that they caught, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So in huge parts of Pennsylvania, which is a big state, a real state, filled with really nice people, and it was an economic powerhouse for more than 100 years, in huge parts of that state, there are no jobs. There is poverty, there is hopelessness, and there are huge numbers of drug ODs. That state's been devastated by opioids, by fentanyl. But John Fetterman, if he had one wish, if he could make one change to the state of Pennsylvania, he'd let the murderers out. Right. That's who he cares about. So in Pennsylvania, typically, if you commit murder, you get life in prison, as you should. You're not allowed to kill people. But Fetterman would change that. He'd like you out of jail as quickly as possible. Talk about a rich kid concern, by the way. No actual populist or actual working class person talks like this, worries about punishing murderers too much. Maybe if you achieved the first 115 things on your to-do list, you'd worry about, are the murderers serving too much time in prison? That'd be after you got people jobs, after you convinced their children to stay in the state where they were born, after you fixed the fact that thousands are dying of drug ODs. Only rich kids think like that. And by the way, only rich kids wear hoodies to political events. Oh, I'm a working man, I'm wearing a hoodie. No working man actually wears a hoodie to a political event. Oh, your stupid little fake tattoos. It's a costume, of course. Duh. It's not real. But John Fetterman, inspired by his time at Harvard and the Aspen Institute, would like to free a third of the prison population in Pennsylvania. And it's just for starters. Watch. It's not a profound statement. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's a profound statement. Where do you learn to talk like this? It's a profound statement, says the hoodie guy. You're an idiot. You've never had a job, and you wrecked the town that you ran. You didn't even show up at council meetings. What? Climate change. Let the murderers out. We'll have a much safer society when we let the incorrigibly violent roam among us. Right. This is the guy who made Braddock, Pennsylvania more dangerous than Honduras. And of course, the point is not simply to wreck what he inherited, what we all inherited. It's to change the state forever for his own political benefit. The point is to flood the state of Pennsylvania with brand new voters, all of them loyal to the Democratic Party. More voter fraud, please. Fetterman has been in lockstep with the leaders of his party on that question from the very beginning, and that's why he would like to get rid of all barriers to voter fraud, including and especially voter ID, as soon as possible.
In my own state, they are going to attempt to pass a constitutional amendment, making sure that universal voting ID for every time you vote, not just when you sign up to vote, but every time you vote, because they understand that at any given time, there's tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians who typically are on the poorer side and are people of color that are less likely to have their ID at any one given time.
So poor people don't have IDs? Really? Because everyone who lives in our society over the age of 18 has a government-issued ID because you can't live here otherwise. And you can't collect any government benefits without one. You can't do anything without one. So that's a lie. He's affirmatively abetting voter fraud. Now, we should tell you that the clips we just played were John Fetterman speaking before he had, and we say this with no glee, but instead with deep sympathy, a massive stroke. His campaign says the stroke occurred shortly before he won the Democratic state primary in May. Whenever it happened or whatever caused it, the stroke has been profound and has rendered Fetterman unable to speak coherently. And again, we're not being mean. We say this with sympathy, but it's true. Because it's not just about John Fetterman and how he's feeling. It's about the country he hopes to control if elected to the United States Senate. And so it's bad. It's really bad. Here he was campaigning recently in Pittsburgh, for example.
Just earlier today, I was so proud to march with you in downtown Pittsburgh. Labor Day. Happy Labor Day. Send me to Washington, D.C. so I can work with Senator Casey and I can champion the Union way of life in in D.C. Thank you very much, and it's an honor. I live 8 minutes away from here, and when I leave tonight, I got 3 miles away, Dr. Oz in his mansion in New Jersey. You've got a friend and you have an ally. Send me to Washington, D.C.
You know, it's not even worth making fun of. It's sad, but when cognition goes, when the ability to think clearly disappears, and in his case it obviously has, what's left? The talking points. That's all that remains, and that's all he has, the talking points. The Union way of life. This is a kid who lived off his parents until he was in his mid-40s. What? He's never been in a union? What are you even talking about, you fraud? So not surprisingly, Fetterman has refused up until today to schedule a debate with his opponent, Dr. Oz. Just hours ago, he announced he's willing to debate. But no details are forthcoming. Sometime in mid-October, of course, when the early voting has already been well in progress. It's starting now, by the way, the early voting in Pennsylvania. So if you delay the debate till right before the election, it's irrelevant because people have already voted. Only Democrats seem to understand this. He doesn't even talk to the media at this point because he can't. In some cases, here's one, his staffers won't even let him answer questions that he has posed. Watch this. His hoodie and his fraudulent tattoos. I mean, honestly, this is like the barista in Brooklyn dressing like a lumberjack. Oh, please, go back to Oberlin, you fake. So there's a huge problem here. The guy can't talk, okay? And even CNN has acknowledged that. John Fetterman, a candidate for the U.S. Senate, cannot speak. Watch.
Members of the United Steelworkers Tuesday, Fetterman was on message, but often halting in his speech and occasionally dropped words mid-sentence.
Being anti-union is anti-American. What is wrong with demanding for an easy, safe kind of their income, a path to a safe place for them to win, to work.
Fetterman declined to answer questions from CNN and other reporters at the event.
So we could go on and play you more tape, but it's just awful, and nobody wants to watch that. We don't want to play it for you. We just want to make the point. This guy is completely impaired. That's not some kind of Republican talking point. It's completely real. So think about what that means. The Democratic Party has not replaced him. This has been going on since he got the nomination, but he's still in the race. That is shocking, and it's insulting, not simply to voters in Pennsylvania, but to the rest of us who, if this guy's elected, will have to live under his rule. But the Democratic Party prefers it that way. They did it with Biden. They're trying it again with Fetterman. Run a wax dummy for office. People who can't form complete sentences apparently seem less threatening to voters. How much damage can he really do? He can't even talk. Apparently that's what they think. And of course, people like Fetterman and Biden are much easier to control. So on the one occasion Fetterman has actually been asked directly about this, wait a second, you're cognitively impaired. How did he respond? Well, as a victim, of course. If you've got a problem with a brain-damaged senator, you're a bigot. Watch this. Oh, making fun of people. How dare you do that? He's disabled. Shut up. Accept it. How dare you acknowledge the obvious? You have no right. This is all about John Fetterman's personal journey. So you're not allowed to ask, well, how will this affect me if that guy who can't think clearly is elected to the United States Senate? That's impolite. They do this on so many issues, and they're doing it with him. And it works. Most people just shut up. It's considered completely out of bounds to mention the fact that John Fetterman is completely incapable of representing Pennsylvania in the United States Senate. And as we said, That fact, and it is a fact, is fine with the people who run the Democratic Party. They just want the power. But the rest of us should be very worried by this. If they can get this guy elected statewide in this nation's 5th largest state, this guy, an incompetent husk with incredibly stupid and totally provably destructive ideas, a man with no record of achievement at all, a man with a long list of documented failures, a man who, by the way, cannot even think clearly. If they can do that, they can do literally anything. Anything. So the state of California is of great interest to anyone who wants to know the future of the rest of the country because it's like a metaphor for America more broadly. Like our country, California has a lot of energy. In fact, there's enough energy in California to power the entire United States, just like in the broader U.S. We've got enough energy. We're just not using it. And that means that tonight, everyone who owns a cell phone in the state of California is getting texts telling them not to use electricity because they're about to have blackouts. So the question is, what's going to happen next? Will the state of California be able to keep electricity flowing through the outlets? Seems like kind of a basic requirement of civilization to us. We don't know what's going to happen. Trace Gallagher might. He's been following the story. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, you're right. Late in the day here in California, and it's hot, and we are back again in emergency energy territory. For days now, we've been teetering between levels 2 and 3. That's the most severe, and it means big-time potential for what the state calls power curtailments. You and I would know them better as blackouts or rolling power outages. Of course, the theory behind the turning the power off on a rolling basis is to make sure the entire grid doesn't fail, leaving millions in the dark in dangerous heat for days on end. On top of the heat wave, there's a few other problems with California's already failing grid system. Hydropower is down because water levels are down. Solar power is up, which helps during the day, but the state does not have enough battery power to store solar, so it's use it or lose it. That's why most of the time, and especially at night, the grid is powered by good old fossil fuels. And during this record heat, we have learned that Governor Gavin Newsom is just really cool. So cool that he wore a fleece jacket in what he said was a 78-degree room. Today, he skipped the winter attire but explained why he is, to quote a phrase, cool beyond words.
What? Pre-cool your home and make sure that that thermostat's above 78 degrees. Still feels cool beyond words. I walked in at 78 degrees and felt like I needed a jacket because of the distinction between the elements outside and on the inside.
Record heat, he's cool, even in record heat. Tucker.
He certainly is. Trace Gallagher, great to many years. He's the author of Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All, a book title that's been completely vindicated by current events. He also ran for governor in California and sadly did not win. He would have helped a lot. Michael Schellenberger joins us tonight. Michael, thanks so much for coming on. So, I mean, I know you're not a gloater. This is also sad, but it turns out you were completely right.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this isn't that hard to understand. I mean, we've been shutting down nuclear power plants. We've been shutting down natural gas power plants. You know, we pay the most for electricity of anybody in the continental United States, and yet they can't keep the lights on. I mean, you saw the governor there wearing a fleece jacket. There is no way that he was in an environment of 78 degrees or warmer wearing that jacket. He was in an air-conditioned environment. He has not apologized for what he's done here. This is a case study in how ideology makes people incompetent. It makes them stupid, frankly. I mean, there's no excuse for this. When there's blackouts, Tucker, as you know, people die. Air conditionings don't work. The elderly, the sick are the most vulnerable. So this is really inexcusable. And I think it's a warning to the rest of the United States to not go down this path of over-relying on weather-dependent renewable energies.
And it really is a cult. I mean, he doesn't apologize because he sincerely believes the one true faith of renewable energy. That's my takeaway.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been writing about this. It's basically people that move away from traditional religion. They basically turn nature into a new god, a new victim god, that on the one hand they want to take orders from, and on the other hand they want to harmonize with through renewables. But the problem is the weather doesn't cooperate, so we haven't had as much water for hydroelectricity. We're actually getting 10% less electricity from carbon-free sources today than we were 10 years ago.
It's complete. And then they destroy the environment because they don't actually love nature. And those of us who do are Highly annoyed. Michael Schellenberger, I sure appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
At some point at Boston University in Boston, somebody told Sandy Cortez that she was oppressed. She was oppressed. That a white girl with a conquistador's name was an oppressed Latina. And apparently she believed it. And she's been talking about it and running on it ever since. How oppressed is Sandy Cortez? Well, she's on the cover of GQ right now. That's how oppressed. You're seeing that cover on your screen at the moment. And then she told GQ, and we're quoting, "Realistically, I can't even tell you if I'm going to be alive in September. And that weighs very heavily on me." Now, if Sandy Cortez was your 13-year-old daughter, and she sounds like it, you would tell her to, quote, "Calm down. Stop being hysterical. You'll be alive in September. I think you're going to be okay. Oh, let it pass." But because this is 2022 and we're in America, we have to pretend, oh yeah, Sandy Cortez could die. And then there was another piece in Vogue about Ketanji Brown Jackson. We can't even begin to make sense of that, and that's why we've asked our friend Eddie Scarry to join us tonight. He's the author of Liberal Misery, and we're happy to see him. Eddie, thanks so much for coming on. What do you make of this? She might not be alive in September. That's this month.
Well, this is something that the left, which would include the media like GQ, have down to a science. This is the defining trait of the liberals, the Democratic Party, the media, of course, which is claiming victimhood, claiming to be aggrieved, claiming to be oppressed, always on account of sex, gender, sexual identity. That is rewarded mightily in our culture, which is very much dominated by the left. As you see, you get glossy, gag-worthy spreads on GQ. You get lots of money. You can get a raise. You get lots of attention. This is otherwise known as the Jussie Smollett effect.
But I mean, if you're Sandy Cortez and you're literally from an affluent town in Westchester and you're literally named after a conquistador, Cortez, and you're telling everyone you're an oppressed racial minority, they're like, oh, yes, you are. Like, how does this continue?
Right. I think that this is the greatest scam perpetuated on the American people probably of the last 10 years. Once again, you can see it time and time again. That's why we have so many fake hate crime hoaxes. People that want attention, this is how they get it.
It's unbelievable. And it works. Eddie Scarry, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're not being mean, but we couldn't help but notice that many of the world's so-called health officials seem very unhealthy. Like the most unhealthy people you've ever seen in your lives. We've got the pictures next. Jaw-dropping. Britain has a new prime minister tonight. In addition to that, they have a new health minister. Here's what she looks like. Her name is Theresa Coffey. You're looking at her picture. So what are her qualifications? Kind of bum a light. Health minister? This is the person who pushed COVID lockdowns. This person tried to push COVID shots on children. Theresa Coffey. Right, let's put the gym owners in jail. But it's not just her. Health ministers all over the world seem to have something in common. Here's Maggie-Céline Louise de Block, for example. She was the health minister over in Belgium until recently. Did she retire for medical reasons? We're not exactly sure. But she's no longer the health minister. She may have some health concerns to attend to herself. And here in the United States, we have Rachel Levine, Admiral Levine, who's floridly mentally ill, who literally dresses as a woman and appears to think that she is, even though he is a dude. That's our health authority here in the United States. But be sure to put the gym owners in jail. And anyone who's practicing MMA or professional sports and doesn't have a vaccine should not be allowed to proceed, says Rachel Levine, and the lady from Great Britain who's smoking. By the way, that wasn't like an anti-vice. Carlson, tonight, Queen Elizabeth II died today in Scotland, as you likely know, at the age of 96. She was the longest-serving monarch in British history. She was born in one world and died in another. It's not easy to maintain your dignity while living in the public eye. Most of us could not pull it off for an afternoon. Queen Elizabeth did it for more than 70 years. I want to ask you all, she wrote shortly before her coronation in 1953, whatever your religion may be, to pray for me on that day, to pray that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve him and you all the days of my life. For the most part, she did just that, and that was not a small achievement given the period she lived in. The week that Elizabeth was coronated, Edmund Hillary, a British subject from New Zealand, a beekeeper, became the first man in history to summit Mount Everest. The achievement seemed symbolic at the time, Britain on top of the world. But in fact, Britain was already over, whether the British knew it or not. To this day, Britain claims to have won both of the 20th century's world wars, but together they destroyed that nation forever. After victory came humiliation. The empire evaporated, and along with it, Britain's self-confidence and ultimately its self-respect. It's hard to believe now, but Britain wasn't always a regional banking center / refugee camp. It was a real place with a history and a language and a culture and a genuinely remarkable people. A country in the North Atlantic the size of Alabama that somehow took over the world and ruled it with decency unmatched by any empire in human history. The British Empire was not perfect, but it was far more humane than any other, ever. It's gone now, barely even remembered. Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain. Today on social media, the usual ghouls celebrated her death. Quote, "May her pain be excruciating," a Carnegie Mellon professor called Uju Anya wrote on Twitter of the Queen. "May she die in agony." Various know-nothings in the media, including a columnist at The Atlantic and a couple of employees of NBC News, seconded that thought. The British Empire was evil, they wrote, apparently totally unaware of what came after it. And speaking of what did come after the British Empire, how, for example, did Africa fare after the British left? Let's see. Uganda got Idi Amin, who was a cannibal. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe and then became the poorest country on the planet under the racist lunatic Robert Mugabe. As of tonight, South Africa is still being run into the ground by an incompetent kleptocrat called Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's hard to see any of that as an improvement because it's not an improvement. Sorry, Atlantic Magazine. And now, of course, the entire continent of Africa has a new master, the Chinese government. China is the latest colonial power to dominate Africa. Its subjects will be pining for the British soon, assuming they are not already. In an ideal world, there would not be empires, no empires, only sovereign nations. But we don't have that world, and we never have had that world, going back to at least the Assyrians, 1400 years before Christ. In the real world, the one that we live in, strong countries dominate weak countries, and that trend shows no sign of changing. The very least you can say about the English is that they took their colonial responsibilities seriously. They didn't just take things, they added. When the US government withdrew from Afghanistan after 20 years, we left behind airstrips, shipping containers, and guns. When the British pulled out of India, they left behind an entire civilization, a language, a legal system, schools, churches, and public buildings, all of which are still in use today. Here's the train station the English built in Bombay, for example. There's nothing like that in Washington, D.C. right now, much less in Kabul or Baghdad. Today, India is far more powerful than the UK, the nation that once ruled it, and yet after 75 years of independence, has that country produced a single building as beautiful as the Bombay train station that the British colonialists built? No, sadly, it has not. Not one. So despite what they may be claiming on Twitter tonight, the British Empire was more than just genocide. In fact, the British did not commit genocide, except arguably against the Dutch during the Boer War. The British did give the world the Magna Carta, and habeas corpus, and free speech. They helped end the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the ritual murder of widows in India. The British Empire spread Protestant Christianity to the entire world. It published some of the greatest literature ever written, and produced the finest manufactured goods ever made anywhere at any time, including now. It was an impressive place run by impressive people. We will see many empires going forward, but we will never see one so benign. That's true. And because it's true, the people who would like to run the world in a far harsher way would like to make certain that you don't know it. And so they destroy the evidence that ever existed. Here they are tearing down a statue of a British philanthropist in the UK 2 years ago.